Hey, John.
Hi, Jeff.
How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, sorry I was running a little bit late. It's a Utah holiday today, and
Ah,
I'd forgotten about it. And there's a parade. My studio's right downtown, and there's a parade that's just all over town, and you can't even get anywhere. I was stuck in traffic. I'm literally a mile from my studio, and I was stuck in traffic for 20 minutes.
oh.
So, so sorry I'm a little bit late.
What's the holiday?
It's called Pioneer Day. It's basically a celebration of when Utah was founded.
Oh, okay. And do they have floats? Is it that kind of parade or?
Yep. It's I would say it's bigger than the 4th of July here in Utah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Big old parades and lots of floats and whatnot. So yeah. I never really participate much. I'm a New Yorker, so I've never really gotten into Pioneer Day, even though I've been in Utah for 25 years. So,
Oh, okay.
or more than 25 years. I've been here a long time, 27, 28 years. So yeah. But anyway, that's why I'm a little bit late. So sorry about that.
No, no problem. Now, if you're listening, I'm talking to Jeff Hein in Salt Lake City, isn't it? That's where you are?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And just to give you time context for our conversation, today is Monday, the 24th of July, 2023. Pioneer Day, I've just discovered.
Hmm.
Um, all right. So, for someone listening who hasn't seen your work, how would you describe your paintings?
Um, Man, that's tough because I feel like my paintings are kind of all over the board. I think the thread that holds all my paintings together is realism. I mean, I'm interested in the human figure mostly. I do lots of portraits, I do biblical work, and I think when one looks closely at my work, you could see the threads, the ties that hold them together. And in other words, the approach to painting that I take. Um, but it's pretty diverse. I mean, I've got portraits that I mix the figure uh, with some level of abstraction, and then I go all the way to classical realism and biblical work that's very traditional. So it's pretty broad.
Yeah, brilliant. And uh, your artistic endeavors are not just limited to painting. You do a lot. I mean, you've got the fantastic The Undraped Artist podcast, which is wonderful.
Thank you.
But you make knives as well. You've got. I saw you're doing a van build. You're turning columns on your house. Just run through all the things you do.
Yeah, so I don't really even think of myself as an artist. I think of myself as just a creative person, just a maker maybe. And I make my living doing paintings, but yeah, I've got my hands in a lot of different things. I mean, I grew up, my dad was really good with his hands. He could build anything. And so I grew up with this little modest shop that we had in our backyard and I was exposed to tools at an early age, and I would follow my dad around every weekend, and he would have side jobs finishing houses or building decks and so on. Um, so I kind of had exposure to tools, and it really stuck. And and I grew up. I mean, this is sort of cliche, but I grew up with not a lot. We were pretty broke most of the time, so I found my father found it really useful to build what we couldn't afford, and I've sort of adopted that mentality. And or at least early on I did, where I would make things that I couldn't afford to buy. Nowadays, though, it's more expensive to make things than to buy things. So my new philosophy is build what you can't find, and if you can find it, buy it. So typically when there's something that I want that I can't, that isn't out there, that's when I like to get my hands dirty and build things. So I'm tinkering around with leatherworking, metalworking, woodworking, electronics. I mean, just lots of different things. I've
What are you
done
doing with the electronics? I didn't see that bit.
Oh, like, there's lots of little mechanisms and little machines and stuff in my studio that help my processes. I've got this like little uh this is just an example, but this little automatic terp container where I wave my hand in front of it and it opens up and I can clean my brushes, and then when I pull my hand away it closes. So, and the reason I built that was because I developed irritant induced asthma like 15, 20 years ago from solvents. So,
Right.
but I really like using solvents, so I created this device that keeps my solvent container closed if I'm not using it. Things like
Wow.
that. And electric pencil sharpener. I mean, when I was a kid, I burglar alarmed my room so my mom wouldn't get in my drawers. I mean, I've always been kind of into
Who
that
doesn't?
sort
Doesn't
of thing.
everyone do that? I thought that.
Yeah, yeah. It drove her crazy. And then in
Wow.
my van, like you'd mentioned, I did this van. I did all the electrical work in that, and just it's mostly out of need. It's not like I'm terribly good at it. I just do it um, as needed. If I need electrical stuff, I'll figure it out.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Yeah, I love all that stuff myself. Um, do you know Laura Camp, the German maker lady on
No, I
YouTube?
don't. What does she make?
All that sort of stuff. All that
Oh,
sort
she
of stuff.
does. I'll have to look her up.
Yeah, yeah, she's brilliant. She's sort of friends with Tom Sachs, that kind of gang. There's a whole there's a load of it's one of those rabbit holes on YouTube. If you start to get into makers at all, they're all there. But yeah, no, Laura Camp is brilliant. I really enjoy
Uh,
her. And just
it's
when you're talking about making little gadgety things like that, that she does that a lot.
Yeah, it's addicting. I don't know, it's fun. If you should see my studio. It's like Santa's workshop. That's what I call it.
Oh,
Santa's
well, I
workshop.
did see it. I
There's
saw
so
it in
many
that little
tools.
when you did your tour of your, I think it was your live streaming setup.
Okay.
You did a little video of like how you put it all together. I was so impressed.
Thanks. Yeah. That's where all my money goes. I mean, after my kids are dead.
Because I did a little bit of live streaming during the lockdowns as well for meditation, not for anything like that. But I know how difficult it is, and man, you have all the right stuff, and you've got all the different camera angles. Like for what you were doing, like for the painting, demonstrations and live streaming, what you're doing. I thought that's so good, and you could just do it all. Like I knew like that you could control all the different cutting from one camera to the other, just at the touch of a button as you're working, not interfering with your flow. So good.
Yeah, it's so helpful. Especially for me because I mean, I'm not a multitasker. I've gotten good enough at painting and talking that I can paint and talk, which is really kind of a miracle, but most things I need to stay focused on one thing. So if I don't have all this equipment set up just right, I start to get all flustered and it just becomes a disaster. So
Yeah, me
yeah,
too.
so that's why I put the effort into that.
Yeah, apparently multitasking is really bad for your brain. So
That's what I hear. Yeah. Apparently
yeah,
no one can, but I don't know. Some are better flipping back and forth than others.
yeah, yeah. Have you come across? I think it's called onomatopoeia. It's like these little wooden things, and they've got a little handle on the side of them, and you just turn it really gently. And this like could be a bird made out of wood, and it's got these little rods that comes up, and
Yeah.
those
Like the
things.
whales and stuff that'll kind
Yeah,
of, oh my gosh, that stuff is so cool. Why have you
isn't
have you
it?
tinkered with that?
No, but I love it and I'm fascinated by it. And, I sort of follow a couple of people on Instagram. They have these little videos and it's always so delightful, because they make everything. They make the little wooden cogs and to have it all
Yeah.
figured out. And often there's a guy in Wales who I must have come across him, 30 years ago. And he was making these little art pieces, like he'd have Anubis doing these funny things. So you got the dog head with the ears and all this kind of thing. And he's, you'd have the turn the little handle thing, and then Anubis, I don't know, making pancakes or it's just really funny and
Mhm.
artistic at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff's interesting. I find that for me, it's always stuff that I need more than stuff that like trinkets like that. I wish I took the time. Well, I don't even have any more time, so it's not even an option. But I often wish I had more time so that I could do stuff just for make things for making's sake, you know. But it's usually stuff like, oh, I need a new easel that does this thing that other easels don't do, so I'll spend time making that. Or you know, I need a new sharpener because I got this pencil that I can't sharpen; it's too soft. Or but it's rarely things like you just described where it's just making it just for the sake of making something.
I know, yeah.
So that'd be nice to have more time for that kind of thing.
More time. I'm sure we're going to come back to
Yeah.
that time management.
Yeah.
Um, so, again, just for someone listening, just to put your sensibilities in context, who are your creative heroes? Are they all painters? Does it spread out to other fields of rather than just painting?
Yeah, you're going to test me on this one because my memory is crap. I mean, I can't, I'm terrible when someone puts me on the spot with names. But I mean, I have lots of heroes, and my tastes are pretty diverse. And anyone who's listening, as you mentioned, I have the podcast as well. And I mean, some people would say it's not very diverse, but I think my tastes are pretty diverse. But I would say if I had to pick one artist, and it's totally predictable, but the one artist I studied the most to learn how to paint, the way that at least to get to the goal that I'm striving for, it's been Rembrandt. As far as living artists, I'm very inspired by Stephen Assail. I'm inspired by one of my students, Alex Venezia. He's amazing. I'm inspired by there's just there's a million painters out there. Of dead painters, Waterhouse is one of my favorites. Solomon J. Solomon. Um, yeah, a ton. And of course everyone I've interviewed on my podcast, these are all people that I look up to, and that's why I'm interviewing them because they're absolutely amazing. So
Yeah,
the list is huge. It's huge
yeah,
of my influences.
yeah. Does it go outside painters like creative
Um,
heroes?
that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever thought much about that. I mean, I obviously I appreciate beautiful things when I see them. I don't know that I've really zeroed in on a particular maker outside of painters. It's more like I'm inspired by this piece or that piece. I probably should look a little harder and figure out who's making these things. But I would say just painters. Painters are the ones that I really zero in on
Yeah.
because that
No, the
is the
reason I
most of what I do. I mean, it's even though I'm wasting a lot of time making things, most of my time and energy is going into painting.
Yeah, the reason I ask is often, and you've probably found this yourself talking to other artists, is often you'll sort of I'll mention that, and then suddenly someone has this big affinity with classical music, and that's where all their inspiration comes from. It isn't really from other painters, or cinema is a big one, or writing is another one, or poetry. So I like to
Yeah,
ask.
no, not me. I'm pretty straightforward. I'm mostly, I mean, I can't say that I haven't been influenced a little bit by film. I mean, because I've often thought, because I'm trying to do multi-figure work and it's really hard. And I've often looked or I've thought about how creating a multi-figure painting feels a lot like I imagine directing a film would. So I've often looked at films in that way, trying to analyze how they're put together and how people move and how they express emotion.
Yeah.
And I've even looked at, like plays and theater and stuff because they tend to
Mm,
overact. And I think overacting is a little more suited for painting.
yeah.
Um, and so I have been influenced by that on some level, but again, I couldn't point to particular plays or people, just in general. And then also
Yeah.
photography. I've been influenced by photography lighting. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I didn't use photography at all for many, many years, but even though I wasn't using it, I was actually reading about how photographers light, and they have some brilliant solutions to lighting. And so yeah. So man, now that you got me thinking, I guess, yeah, there is a lot of stuff that I've been looking at aside from painting.
Yeah, yeah. You reminded me of Will Rochford. I don't know if you know his work, but he paints what are very like stills from a movie, and when he's setting up his photo shoots, he sets them up like that, and he's got lots of figures in them, and they look,
Yeah.
when you look at the paintings, you kind of go, oh yeah, is that's it's like from a movie that never made.
Yeah, that's exactly exactly how I'm looking at it. You know, another thing I'm influenced by, I make these little maquettes. They're and I try and make them really realistic. These 1/6 scale scenes. So it might be a building or I mean it's usually or it might be some piece of a landscape and then I put these little figurines in them and I make little clothes for the figurines and then I light them and photo and now I photograph them. I used to work entirely just looking at them from life in order to use them as reference. But
Yeah.
so I've been looking on YouTube and Instagram and various other places at people that make these miniatures just for the sake of making miniatures, like people who
Yes.
have these amazing train sets, or or people who make them for their little toy figures, Star Wars figures or whatever. And man, there are some really talented people out there that make these incredibly realistic miniatures.
Yes.
And I've learned a lot from them too. And that's really fun to do. Sometimes I even enjoy making the miniatures as much or more than the painting.
Yeah. 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 And the latest version of that, Arthur Gain was, yeah, I don't know if you know his work, but he was telling me he does all that in computer now. He'll
I
import
know.
3D models and light that, and he'll basically set it all up so that he gets it's like exactly what you're talking about, but just doing it in the computer. And he'll import, he'll get Roman soldiers from, somewhere, and he'll pull it all in together, make the thing, and then that'll be his reference. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. I have a friend who's been trying to get me to do that, and I'm not opposed to it as though it's some ethical thing. But I've really I'm gonna have a hard time making that switch because I just I just I just love the tactile nature of making things with your hands.
Yeah.
So I struggled forever just to go back to photography, and so now it's funny because I quit photography back in 2008 and just painted entirely from life. And then in 2004, wait, what year are we in now?
23.
2023. So yeah, so when COVID hit, had to use cameras again because my models didn't want to take their masks off. So um I started using photography again, and then a couple years later, AI is introduced, and I'm like, you got to be freaking kidding me! I'm just getting used to using photography, and now artists are starting to implement AI a year after I pick up a camera. So I think all those tools are fine, but it's going to be a while before I'm willing to, stop working with my hands and start totally working on the keyboard.
Yeah, yeah. You're only a stone's throw away from stop motion animation, though. If you're going to all that trouble with making the scene.
I know. It's true. It's true in a way. That's very true. Yeah, but it's so fun to make it with your own hands. It's just the process is just awesome. I love it. But again, it's not like one is wrong and one is right. It's just we're all different people to have different ways of doing things.
So, what's your backstory? How did you come to be an artist?
Um, so I always knew I wanted to be an artist, although I didn't know what that meant. As I mentioned before, I grew up in a lower middle class family, and there were 7 people in our house with 12. I think it's like a 1,200 square foot house. When I go home to visit, it feels like a hobbit house now. Um, and and so I didn't really draw that much as a kid. It just didn't feel like we had room to set up and really accomplish much. But I knew I had. a natural ability as a kid, and I would draw a lot in school. And the reason I would draw in school is because I didn't want to be doing the other works. So it would be my way of, distracting myself from schoolwork. While I should have been listening to the teacher, I was doodling on the back of my books. And I noticed at an early age that I had an aptitude for this stuff, and it became kind of my identity. And I remember clear back to the second grade. I've told this story before, but I was drawing in second grade. I was drawing during recess, and a bunch of kids gathered around me to watch, which is not an unfamiliar thing to many artists that I've talked to. But the one little girl said to me, "Are you going to be an artist when you grow up?" And I vividly remember thinking about the question, like really thinking about it, and
What
deciding at
age
that
did you say
moment,
you were?
second grade.
5.
Second grade, so I probably was like 6 or 7. I was a young
Wow.
schooler. I started at 4, so maybe 7, 6 or 7.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, I remember thinking about it and deciding at that moment, yeah, I'm going to be an artist when I grow up. But I didn't know what it meant. I thought maybe I would illustrate books because that was all I knew. I'd never seen fine art. We'd never been to galleries or museums. My parents just didn't do that sort of thing. Um, we lived like just so close to New York City, and I even had family in Brooklyn, and we'd go down there to visit them, but we never saw any museums. Just wasn't part of our culture. So I don't think I actually even knew what fine art was till I was maybe 26, around 26 years old. So I ended up going to study illustration, and then at some point I discovered this fine art thing. There was a fine art department at the University of Utah where I was studying illustration, and I started inquiring about this, and I'm like, "What is this fine art thing?" And they're like, "Oh, it's painting. You can just paint whatever you want." I mean, this is not how they said it, but this is what I understood after talking to people. You paint whatever you want and put it into a gallery and sell it. And I'm like, I am done with illustration. This is what I want to do. So I moved over into the fine art department at that point. And that was about when I was about 26. I had a slow start because I went to school for a year in 92 when I graduated. Then I went on a 2-year mission for my church, and then I got cancer for a couple years. And so by the
Wow.
time I got back to school and really got rolling, I was in my mid 20s, early to mid 20s.
Yeah.
So I got a little bit of a late start um, because of that. And that's why it took so long for me to figure it out. So, but
Yeah.
then by the time I was 28, I was working as a full-time artist.
Wow. Okay. That's that's quite a journey. I had
Yeah.
John.
Yeah. It's
I had
interesting.
John Darley on as a guest a while ago, and he was saying that having to go on a mission for 2 years was such a great preparation for dealing with rejection, like that he
It's true. Yep.
he was
Yep. John
he
was
was
my
saying,
student. I think he mentioned, I did
yeah.
listen to the podcast. Yeah. John's great. Yeah, it's true. You get rejected plenty. And I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, I suppose that's true.
Well, he was talking about it. He was watching other students kind of getting rejection and being completely crushed by it, and he was kind of going, "Wow, this is mild. This is that it's not really rejection, you know. I know what rejection is like, and this isn't really it."
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and you
Yeah,
kind of have to have a thick skin in this field because you're gonna
yeah.
you're gonna lose a lot of contests, and a lot of paintings aren't gonna sell. So yeah, I suppose maybe it did help. I'd never thought about it.
So, as you say, you do lots of different types of things, but just roughly, and not talking about commissions now, more your own kind of work. How does the idea for a painting start for you?
Well, so right now, I mean, I can't really not talk about commissions when I talk about that because my commissions, I think personally, are different than a lot of people assume commissions are. And but as I said, I'm doing two things and
Well, let
with
me qualify a little bit. What
yeah.
I'm curious about is how you capture those very wispy kind of ideas for a painting. You know, like a very cliched kind of question that artists get asked a lot is, what inspires you? I always feel that it's way too vague and not that helpful if you're listening, kind of thing. Whereas, some artists are very verbal. They write things down. They get an idea and they write it down. Others will make voice memos on their phone. Others are like fanatical
Oh, I see what you're
sketchbookers,
saying.
little thumbnail, So it's like, what's your collecting mechanism for capturing those little wispy bits of inspiration and sort of capturing them, and then how do you mash them together into what finally becomes the painting?
Wow. I don't know that I have a process. It's just it, things just show up in my mind. Not necessarily paintings show up in my mind, but things that I'm interested in. It could be, it might not be, and it might not be in my mind. It might be that I'm sitting somewhere and I see a person that inspires me, and then that
Yeah.
person gets me. For example, I was once sitting in a public space and I saw this woman and I thought she would make a great character for X. I had no plans to paint that particular narrative until I saw that woman. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll paint that narrative
Yeah.
because that woman inspired the narrative. That happens all the time. I'm often inspired just by the characters, and then I build the painting around the particular model or character. Obviously, I'm inspired by the Bible because I painted a lot of Bible scenes, and
Mm-hmm.
those I find very interesting. I read once that Rembrandt. I mean, I don't know if I even believe this, but I mean, I remember reading once that Rembrandt wasn't even Christian. That he only painted the Bible because of the drama in the scenes. I think that's a bunch of garbage, but I agree with half of that. And that the half that I agree with is that you don't have to be Christian or Jewish to appreciate the quality of the stories and the narratives in that scripture. So I actually really am interested in those stories, and it really makes my job a lot easier because I get to paint something where there's this common language that spans the entire planet and everyone understands it, and I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I get to start, on a common ground with at least some people. So I enjoy that as well. And so I guess those things. And sometimes
Yeah.
I'll just get nice. Sometimes something will frustrate me. I think one of my most significant paintings or two of my most significant paintings are Consumed and Convenient Charity. And those two were painted. One was painted due to the recession in 2008. And I was frustrated by the recession, frustrated by, in this case, materialism. So I painted this whole painting, just a vent. And then the Consumed one, I remember being overcome with guilt because I didn't feel like I was giving enough to a friend of mine who was struggling. And so I painted this painting to sort of internalize that. So it's really broad, frankly. They could come from all different sources.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you see someone out, out and about, and they, you go, oh, that person would be great for this thing. Do you go up to them? Like, do you want to make them
Yeah,
the model?
totally. Yeah, I do. And it's funny. If it's a woman, oftentimes they're freaked out, which I don't blame them. They should be. And I would tell my daughter to be. But what I do is I say, look, I'm an artist. I know this is creepy and, in so many words, but just check out my website. This is the address. Look me up, Google me, make sure I'm legit. And then if you're interested, give me a call. And 9 times out of 10, they'll call. So that helps. I mean, if I were just coming right out of the gate and there was nothing about me out there to read about or no
Yeah. Yeah.
history, career, it would be a little more difficult to get models. I'd have to just, use my friends over and over again, but it's okay. It works out okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, you've got the, no fear of rejection thing going for you as well.
Actually, that's actually really true because one of the things we do on a mission is go up to complete strangers. And I remember being terrified as in the beginning And now it doesn't, yeah, I don't even think twice about it. It doesn't make me uncomfortable at all. I can tell it makes them uncomfortable, but not me.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so where are you at with photos now? Do you do work with photos now, or once the lockdowns ended and the masks weren't a thing, did you go back to not the camera, or where are you at?
Well, now I'm doing both. So
Okay.
I know this isn't very old to some people, but I'm 48 now. And after I started using the camera, I realized how hard I'd been working. And I'm like, this is great. I'm so ready to keep using this thing because it just simplifies the process so dramatically. Particularly, a lot of artists will say, "No, the camera makes things harder." Yeah, maybe back in the 70s, but with digital photography now, it's so freaking good. By the time you modify it in Photoshop, you're looking at it's practically working from life. And so I not only that, but when you're working with multi-figure, which is mostly what I do, multi-figure painting, it is so incredibly complex to do it from life because you can't see the scene
Hmm.
ever. It's all in your head, and you just have to Frankenstein it together by bringing one model in on Tuesday, another model in on Wednesday, a donkey in on Thursday, a chicken on Friday, and you got to Frankenstein the whole thing together and make it cohesive. And not to mention, the building isn't really there. So you've got a building that's 1/6 the scale, and you're trying to put these other things into it's incredibly complex. So after going back into photography when COVID hit, it just made me realize how hard I've been working for 14 years, and I'm getting older, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm ready to kind of relax a little bit and implement some of these really useful tools. I'll still work from life a lot because I love it. I mean, I'm a real advocate of working from life because I think there's something special about that relationship between the artist and the model. And I feel like the paintings that I've done directly from the model, there's, it sounds sort of silly, but there's like a certain connection that it sort of attaches itself to the painting. I look at it kind of like this. You can either go to Italy or you can look at pictures of Italy, right? And
Yeah.
so when I have a painting that's done from a photo, it's like I did a painting, but that painting was never really there. It's not really the model. It's one step removed from the model.
Yeah.
But when I do a painting using real people, that painting was really there. So it's a true representation of the experience that went into painting it, and more true than it was if I did it from photos. So that part of it I'll really miss. The work and the labor I'm not going to miss anymore. Yeah, that's behind me now. I'm going to mix them up. I'm going to do both. And that way I can kind of feel like I have a little bit of both. I get to relax a little, but I still have that connection with the subject.
Yeah. 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 I remember. I think it was Colin Davidson. I don't know if you know him, but he was saying that he will, when he's doing a portrait, he'll set up his camera and then he'll have a sketchbook as well, and he'll be talking to the person and sketching them. And he was saying that he's really embarrassed if they ever want to see the sketches because the sketches are terrible, because he's not trying to record the likeness, he's trying to capture the energy of the person in his hand, if you like.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I thought it was a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. I think my perspective's a little different than that because I am trying to capture a likeness, but it's just, okay. Let me stretch that analogy a little further. Imagine, so my brother comes home from China a couple years back, and he brought me this little thing, and he said, and it was a gift, from China. He gives it to me, and he's like, Jeff, this is from China. And I'm like, this is awesome. He brought this from China. And then my wife and I joked about it. Everything we own is from China, right? So what's so special about this thing from China? Well, what's so special about this thing from China is that my brother was in China
Yeah.
and he brought it directly from China to me. So it's more special because it is a Chinese thing. It's not an American thing made in China. It is a Chinese thing. It came from China. It was made by the Chinese for the Chinese. It is a Chinese thing. When I when I paint a painting from a real person, it is from that thing. It is more connected to that thing. It is not connected to the photo of that thing. And that's the difference to me. So
Yeah.
while I'm still after a likeness regardless, it's not so much that I'm after that. I think that if I paint from life, I capture their soul more. Although there is something to that too, but that's a different discussion. It's that I'm connected, that the painting is directly connected to the subject and not one step removed.
Yeah. 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 So if I got it right, then you will do a bit of compositing in Photoshop to get your final reference. Is that right?
Yeah, I've started doing that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then what about the next phase? How do you get that onto the canvas? Like
That's just
the drawing
freehand
phase,
drawing.
freehand drawing.
Yeah, just freehand. Yeah, just freehand. I'm a real advocate of that. And because I don't want to lose my drawing skills. So I'm a believer that if I take shortcuts, I'm gonna put that in quotes because again, I'm not saying it's cheating or anything, but to me it feels like a shortcut. But if I take shortcuts, I'm gonna lose the skill. So even if I'm doing, I just finished a couple months ago this big old crucifixion, and the figure is life size. It was really hard to draw from a small monitor,
Mm,
but I did it, and and I feel like the labor that went into drawing it freehand not only preserved my skills in drawing, but improve them. And every time I do that, it continues to improve my drawing skills, improve my drawing skills. And that shows in the finished painting eventually, because the better you draw, the more confidently you make strokes. And you're going to make more beautiful, more fluid, more spontaneous strokes if you draw really well. So it's really important to me not to take shortcuts like projectors or gridding or anything like that for that
yeah.
reason.
That's great. I haven't heard that before, but it's very true, isn't it? The
Yeah.
better you draw, the more confident you'll paint. That's very good. What do you draw with? Like a pencil or a paintbrush?
Most of the time I just paint, I just draw it in with paint.
Paint, yeah.
Well, it depends. I mean, there are, if I, so there, when I'm doing something with architecture, I'll literally, my studio is about 100 feet long. The room I'm in is about 50. And I'll literally have strings going from one end of that 50-foot room to the other and do a perspective drawing on the canvas using those strings. And then I'll use pencil because in perspective drawing, it has to be really precise. And that's for
Right.
architecture. Yeah. But if I'm doing a figure, it's almost always going to be just directly in paint.
Okay. Do you do a color study before you start?
I do. Yeah. I do small color studies, very small, very loose, not too much information, just enough to get the color as it suggests, the name suggests.
So, quite a few artists who use Photoshop end up just doing the color study in Photoshop or getting the colors sorted in Photoshop. What? Why do you do that extra step?
Well, here's the thing. I've only used Photoshop one time. So you got me kind of in this transitional point in my career. So I don't know that I've really established my new way of working yet. And so a lot of my old habits were still part of this new process of using a camera and Photoshop. Um, so maybe I won't at some point. Maybe I won't need the color study. I don't know. But as of right now, that's what I'm still doing. I'm still doing that color study.
Okay. And what do you do a grisaille, or do you paint directly, or what? How do you go
No,
about
I
it?
paint directly. Yeah. And I build up, I paint directly in color. I usually go, in fact, the drawing is not terribly even. I mean, it's precise, but it's not very specific. Precise meaning it's accurate, but not specific when I lay it in. And I usually, if I'm doing a full figure, it's usually laid in an hour or so, and then I'm back. I'm directly into color, and I just build up layers of color, wet on dry, from that point on, and many layers. Sometimes it's, I don't know, 20 layers. I've never counted, but it seems like it just builds and builds.
Okay, so are they being built up in glazes, or?
No, it's I mean, I glaze occasionally, very rarely, but mostly it's just direct paint on dry paint. And the reason why I do it is because, well, there's this principle that I believe in, that there's there's a gradient. Well, let me put it this way: to maximize form in painting, um, and if you understand the principle that transparent paint will recede visually and opaque paint will come forward visually, then if I can create a gradient of transparent paint to opaque paint that is exactly consistent with the gradient of dark to light, then I can maximize the illusion of form. In other words, if I have something that's 50% transparent, then I want something that's 50%, I'm sorry, 50% gray, then I want something that's 50% transparent, 50% opaque. If I have something that's 75% gray, then I want it to be 75% transparent, 25% opaque. So what I'm doing is, as I build up these layers, I'm building up opacity in the lights, in the lightest lights, and slowly reducing opacity in a very careful gradient as I get down to the darkest darks. And I've noticed it in my own paintings. It's hard to see on Instagram. It's one of the frustrating things about social media, but that the level of three dimensionality when working this way is, it's almost unreal. I mean, it makes paint come off the canvas in a way that you wouldn't think that a two-dimensional surface could, or you wouldn't think. And it makes an illusion of the paint coming off the canvas that you wouldn't think possible on a two-dimensional surface. So that's why I work that way. Now, if I glaze, then what I'm doing is I'm introducing transparent paint into the lights. So it doesn't ruin that process, but it certainly doesn't help it.
Yeah, yeah. That's brilliant. That's gold. I was smiling as you were saying that, because it's like it's real. Only painters would really, get what you're talking about, and it's pure, I suppose, art nerd kind of talk, but it's very
Yeah,
good,
totally.
very helpful. And it's just exactly the sort of thing that people who listen, I could just hear people going, "Oh, that's fantastic," me included. Okay, so we've had some questions come in. This one's
Okay.
from Alyssa on Patreon. Thanks for the tea, Alyssa. She says, "Hi, John. I'm a huge fan of both your podcast shows and a big fan of Jeff's podcast as well." Okay, right, yeah. I didn't understand what she meant there, but now I get it.
Yeah, that
I
didn't.
kind of, I kind of forget that I have two podcasts. Yes, okay. So fan of both
Oh, I get
mine
it.
and yours as well. Yeah, okay. Thanks to both of you for building communities we can feel part of. You're welcome. My question. I'd love to know how Jeff approaches shadows in the flesh, and any tips on how to avoid the chalky look generally, please.
Well, I kind of just addressed a little bit about the shadows.
Yep.
Yeah. The chalky thing is okay. Now this might be a little, some artists might disagree with this, but I genuinely believe this. I I believe that the chalkiness in painting is actually more related to the relationship between the lights and the darks than it is the lights. In other words, people think, well, in fact, when I was in school, my teachers would tell me, don't use too much white, don't use too much white because it'll make your paintings chalky. And these very same teachers had these orange skinned figures because they were so afraid of white. And I've since learned that it's not the white paint that makes your figures look chalky. It's what is next to the white paint. It's like my wife has this beautiful yellow skin. It doesn't sound beautiful, it sounds jaundiced, but I promise you it's this beautiful warm tone of skin. Whereas I've got this kind of ugly gray skin. And so I love the color of her skin. But if you put a yellow shirt of the wrong shade of yellow next to her skin, it makes her face look pasty. And it's that relationship in colors that makes her face look, you might say, chalky. So if your paintings are looking chalky, it's not because of the lights. It's think about the relationship between the lights and the darks. Are your darks making your lights look chalky? Maybe change the color so that the harmony between the two is better and that they complement each other. And when I say complement, I don't mean that they're opposites. I mean that they literally complement one each other. They make each other, they bring out the best in each other.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I was smiling again when you were saying that because I imagine that has led to some interesting conversations when your wife asks you, as wives do, "Does this look good on me?"
No, she knows. She came into the marriage knowing she can't wear yellow, so it's all good.
Do you have a favorite color palette that you always start with, or does it
Oh, my
change
color
painting to
palette is
painting?
huge. It's like 28 colors or 30 colors. And the reason why is because I do a lot of optical mixing, which is basically I'm mixing on the canvas.
Hmm.
I'll put down a bright green next to a red and they'll optically mix into a brown, or I'll smush them together and physically mix them into a brown. So, in order to, and I love working in very chromatic colors. So, I find that I can maintain chroma better if I do less mixing on the palette. And so I like to be able to just have various greens and yellows and reds and so on at different values right out of the tube, so that if I need, let's say I'm working in the shadows and I need to cool it, I can grab an ultramarine and just throw ultramarine right into the shadows. I don't need to mix it on the palette. I just put it right into the shadows. But let's say I need an equivalent to ultramarine in the lights. Well, instead of mixing something, I can just grab a King's blue and throw it into the lights. And it just keeps my flesh much more vibrant and helps me to avoid it getting too gray and uninteresting. So
Right.
they're really shortcut colors. So I just have a lot of shortcut colors. How could I paint with a limited palette? Absolutely. In fact, I find it very helpful to use a palette. It's much more complicated to have a palette of 30 colors,
Yeah.
but it's the sacrifice. I sacrifice ease for fresh, dynamic, spontaneous color notes throughout the painting.
Right. And do you have a black preference and a white preference?
I with white, I've gone back and forth between titanium and lead. The way I paint, I've tried lead a million times. The way I paint, I don't find lead as useful as many artists. If you paint fairly thin, uh, then lead is going to be helpful because it's more translucent and that's what it's good at, is making thin, subtle layers. But I paint very thick, so I find titanium white just fine and less poisonous. So I usually use titanium white, and I use a an alkyd fast drying titanium white because I paint thick. I don't want to have to wait weeks or months between layers because titanium white dries so slowly.
Yeah. And black?
I don't use black very often.
Okay.
And not because it's a bad color, but because of what I just described before. I'm interested in a chromatic palette. So if you saw my palette, it's just beautiful. I mean, it's all the colors are chromatic. I have very few browns, and the only browns I have that you might call browns are transparent red oxide and transparent yellow oxide. And if you just put your finger in it and smush red oxide between your fingers, it looks brown in a pile, but between your fingers, it's this rich, rich red, deep, deep red brown. It's so vibrant. So that's as close as I get to brown. And everything else is very vibrant on my palette. So black just doesn't fit
Yeah. Okay.
the way I paint.
All right.
But I
Um,
will say, if I do use it, I use ivory black. I mean, I have ivory black. It's just not a normal. I don't use it normally.
Briley Moreno in California says, looking forward to this. Jeff, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but could I ask what mediums you use and in what ratios, and also what substrates? Huge fan of your work and especially loved the somewhat recent work of Christ you did. Thanks in advance to both of you.
Um,
So, mediums and ratios first.
mediums. So right now, excuse me. So right now I'm using a medium that it's a very traditional medium, and it's called, well, it's been branded the name Prohibition. It's by Edge Pro Gear that makes the Pashad boxes. They make their
Mm-hmm.
a medium that they branded Prohibition, but really I think it's just, well, I know it's just solvent I and linseed oil and Damar varnish. So it's that traditional medium that's been around for centuries. And but before that, I've used, I mean, I have everything imaginable in the studio. I've used Galkid, Galkid Light, I've used Liquin, I've used Neo Megilp, I've used walnut oil, I've used Galkid walnut oil. Um, Honestly, they're all good, and I'll mix and match between them depending on the quality that I want in the brushstroke. But my go-to one lately has been that Prohibition medium from Edge Pro.
Okay. And what about substrates? What do you like to paint on?
So if I'm painting small, well, if I'm doing plein air painting, one sitting alla prima, I like to have a little texture. So I will glue um, oil primed linen on top of panel. If I'm doing a portrait in the studio that's going to have layers, then I don't care about the texture, because in fact, I don't want a texture because I want the shadows to be really smooth, for the reason that I described earlier with the transparent and opaque method I was using or talking about. So I'll use a smooth panel, and if it's small, it'll be ABS plastic, and I'll sand it. It comes really shiny. You get it from just a plastics manufacturer. I'll sand it with 150 grit sandpaper just to give it a tooth, and paint directly on the plastic.
Okay.
Um, and that's something I picked up from the late Bill Whitaker. He'd used it for many, many years before he passed, and it's a great substrate. I mean, if you think about it, I buy it an 1/8 inch thick. It's like 1/8 inch thick gesso. It's just like one solid sheet of gesso.
Yeah,
It's
right.
acrylic. Yeah. So I like that. But if I'm painting large, I paint on canvas and I gesso it with acrylic gesso, 7 or 8 layers, sanding in between until I get a glass-like finish, because I want to
Wow.
get rid of all the texture on the canvas. Again, that's if I'm painting in layers. So I really go after a really smooth finish unless I'm doing alla prima work like landscape painting, because then I want the paint to just grab onto the canvas and cover, because it's only one sitting. So that's the only time I use textured canvas.
Okay. And do you have a favorite type or shape of brush that you lean towards?
Um, Favorite type. I mean, as far as brand, always go with Rosemary brushes, almost always. Their brushes are awesome. I love fan brushes. I use them a lot for my figures in particular. Anytime I want kind of an organic quality to the subject I'm painting, I'll use fan brushes. And I don't fan as in feathering the paint out. I use it as a brush. I mean, I load it up with paint and paint with it, load it up.
Wow.
I also use sables a lot for detail work. I use synthetics occasionally, but mostly I would use fan brushes and hog bristle fan brushes, lots of sables and lots of badger. I don't know what Rosemary's making those out of now, but that mid-range medium softness hair that they use. I don't know if it's badger or squirrel or what anymore, but do you know what
No, I
Rosemary's using
don't.
now? Yeah, I don't
No,
know,
no.
but it's the mid-range. It's not sable, but it's also relatively soft hair. So, and I
Okay.
like filberts. Occasionally I'll use flats if I'm trying to do something more architectural, but for the most part I'll use rounds and filberts.
Okay. And what is your palette like physically? Are you a hold it in your hand kind of person, or are you a glass, or what kind of palette? What's your palette look like?
So I have a palette that's vertical and it's big. It's like 36 by 24. It's made out of PVC plastic, a gray PVC plastic, and then it's backed up with aluminum and it mounts to a thing that pushes right up against my canvas so that I can have the palette on almost the exact same plane as the canvas I'm working on.
Right.
So I'll use that most of the time. And then, but occasionally, if I'm doing something where I have to move around the canvas a lot, like if I'm doing a landscape around the subject and I'm bouncing from place to place, then I'll hold my palette. And I've got a new wave palette for that. One of before they stopped, they discontinued them, one of those really big new wave palettes. Um, and then if I'm plein air painting, I just use the Edge Pro
Right.
gear palette, which is glass. So it varies.
All right. Kyle Johan Jonsson on Patreon, thanks for the tea, Carl, says, I'd like to ask Jeff about his darkest tones in painting, where the dark in his background is very similar to some of the Caravaggio paintings for the chiaroscuro effect. How dark does he go? Pure black? Question mark. I ask because I often feel when looking at yours and Caravaggio's backgrounds, I sense more dark atmosphere that gives the feeling of endlessness rather than just a dark/black color.
I actually read this question. It was in on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Because this question is gold because
Well, let's
he
take a
mentioned
moment here
Carva.
just to appreciate the fact that he just put you in the same bracket as Caravaggio.
Caravaggio. Yeah, I appreciate
Yeah.
that. So the thing is, it's a funny coincidence too, because I did a painting years ago when I was first starting out, right out of school. I did a biblical painting, and I had never seen some of these great old master paintings. I certainly hadn't seen a Caravaggio. I hadn't seen Rembrandt's work, except in books. And in books, this was before the internet, even. Well, not before the internet, but before the internet as we know it. We couldn't just go look up art back then. Um, and in the books, it just looked like black. Like you'd look at a Caravaggio painting and it just looks like black. You look at, and they all just look like black. And that's what I was learning from. And I did this painting and it genuinely looked just black in the background. And I kept thinking that just looks bad. What is wrong? And I don't remember when I discovered it, but years later, maybe, hopefully it wasn't years, maybe it was less. But I finally was exposed to actual old master work and saw just how they did it. And it wasn't, as he put it, it wasn't black. It wasn't just this void in the background. They were painting. There was something there. And that was the thing that I had to learn, is that you can't, or at least I don't think it works if you just obscure the background with this tone of a dark value. You still have to paint stuff, even if the values are so close together that in reproduction you almost don't see it. It's helpful to imagine what's back there and consider that when you're laying in that dark tone. Even just a suggestion of environment back there, it can be ever so subtle that you almost can't see it, but it makes a difference.
Yeah.
So that's why
Brilliant.
I love that question, because I literally saw Caravaggio's work and was like, why does his work look so much better than mine? And then he compared me to Caravaggio. So thank you. Thanks for putting me in the same category. Appreciate it.
How do you check yourself as you're working? You know, like some artists use mirrors a lot, or they'll take pictures on their phone, or they'll turn the canvas upside down, or they'll get their friends in for critiques. What do you do?
You're gonna think I'm such an anal person here, but I don't do any of that stuff for the same reason that I don't use grids and projectors. Because and in my academy, I teach them, or atelier, I teach them the same habits, and that is that anything you do to help you see better is going to actually do the opposite. It might help you get there in this particular painting, but it's also going to make you unable to see in the future. So, I mean, if you think about it in a sport, right? And if you got some guy coming up to you and shooting your free throws when you go to the free throw line and holding your hand and helping you push the ball, I mean, if that guy doesn't show up, how are you going to be able to do it? Or maybe a better example is you're competing in a weightlifting competition, and your spotter is helping you during all the practices lift the weights, and then you get to the competition and he's not there. How are you going to lift the weights, right? So painting is not a competition, granted, but my goal as a painter is not just to make good paintings, but to be good at painting. And so I don't use any devices at all to check my work. I just use my eyes, and I don't turn it over. I don't turn it sideways. I don't do any of that kind of stuff because I really want, and I certainly don't take a picture with my phone because I really want to make sure that I can see. And the only way I can learn to see is to practice seeing, not to shoot with my phone or take shortcuts like mirrors and so on.
Right. And do you squint at all, or is that
Well,
a
that I
shortcut
do.
too?
Yeah. I figure if it's
Oh, you.
attached to my body, then I'm okay. Yeah, if the trick is attached to my body, I'll let it go. Yeah.
Okay. All right. What's your varnishing preference?
Varnishing, shoot, what is it called? I use oh, you put me on the spot. Gamvar, that you can varnish it as soon as it's dry to the touch.
Yeah.
So I'm too impatient to wait 6 months. I gotta eat.
And what kind of lighting setup do you have in your studio?
Oh, I'm spoiled rotten. In my studio, I have these huge skylights. One of them is 12 feet long by 6 feet wide. The other one's about 6 by 6. And they just flood my studio with light. And then along the sides of them are some, they're fluorescent shaped, but they're not fluorescent bulbs that match the temperature of the skylight. So the whole
Okay.
ceiling is putting light down. And then I have this really cool track system with these accordion like arms that bring lights up and down from the ceiling down to about my chest level. And I've got about 12 lights hanging from the ceiling that I can move anywhere into the studio along this track, and of various types, Fresnel lights. I've got like 12 by 12 LED light panels. Fresnels are lights that you can focus into a point, almost like a crude laser. They're
Mm-hmm.
incredible. And then I just big spotlights, all LEDs and all the same temperature as the skylight. So that way
Yeah.
everything in my studio is consistent temperature, but then it's also high CRI, which means the color rendition index. So everything in my studio has a very high um, color rendition output. I mean, you can see almost as much color as the sun can see. So
Yeah.
lighting's really important, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a feeling you would have a beautiful, comprehensive lighting setup.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think you were going to say two clip-on lights that I got in Home Depot.
No, I started that way though. You got to start somewhere.
What, if anything, do you listen to as you paint?
Podcasts.
Okay.
Yeah, that's mostly what I listen to is podcasts. So, and I listen to our podcasts like yours and some others, and then I listen to honestly, I'm going to be completely pretentious here. I listen to my own a lot, and the reason why is because I'm really fortunate when I'm podcasting to be able to ask the questions that I want to know. And so, but then I'll quickly forget, especially once you know how this, I mean, you must know how this is, especially after you've had so many guests, you start to forget what some of them have said. So I find myself going back and saying, okay, shoot, what did this artist say about this? Or what did that artist say about that? And I'll listen to it again. But I also listen to science podcasts. I listen to mystery podcasts, and that's that's about it. I used to listen to music. I don't much anymore. I don't know why I stopped. Sometime in my 30s, I started moving from music to podcasts.
All right. Okay. Um, well, considering you are such a maker, do you have a like your solvent dispenser is one example. Do you have other little quirky things that you've made that nobody else has that you had to make out of necessity, or
Oh my gosh,
tools
yeah,
that
my
you've
studio's
fashioned?
full of
You know.
them. Yeah, I mean, I've got, and people can see this stuff on my Instagram accounts. I have two Instagram accounts. The one is Jeff Hein Studio, Jeff underscore Hein underscore studio. And that's where a lot of these gadgets are. And then Jeff Hein Art is where the paintings are. But
Yeah. Yeah.
probably the
I
most,
saw a tape dispenser. I think on that as well.
yeah, there was a tape dispenser. That's just a little thing for my son because I taught my son to wood turn because he was selling these when he was like 12. He wanted a job. So I said, don't get a job, start your own business. So he started a business making charcoal holders. He did pretty well for a while. Then he got bored of wood turning. But so I made him this
Ah,
little,
12-year-olds.
oh yeah, it was great. Yeah, well, he homeschooled, and he my twins wanted to homeschool, so the deal was that they had to study at the studio, and then when we were done studying, because I knew they'd be done in like 2 hours, where other kids are in school for 8. And I said, when you're done, you can't just waste time. You got to come downstairs in the studio and learn a new skill. So my twins just learned a bunch of different skills, and that was one of his skills that he learned.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, so I made that for that case. But probably the thing that I love the most in my studio is my easel. It's an easel where the canvas can roll up and down, and I don't have to go up or down. I just bring the canvas up and down to me. It's not a stretched, it's stretched, but on the easel. It doesn't have stretcher bars. You'd have to see it to understand it, but it's a really unique thing. And I can do huge paintings on it and not have to use a ladder. So one of them, for example, I could do a 20-foot tall painting by 13 feet wide and never have to get up on a stool or down on the ground. I just bring the painting up and down to me. And that's something I built that I absolutely love. I wish every artist had one of those. Um, and then you mentioned my easels and stuff for the, I mean, there's lots of things, a powder coating oven, ovens for heat treating, just furniture around the studio. I mentioned a custom pencil sharpener that I really love. You could sharpen a cloud with this thing. It's so fragile. Yeah,
That's
it's
very
so great.
poetic. Sharpening a cloud. Do you have a little? Do you have a little gadget that other people might be able to replicate in their studio without extensive making skills, but would be really
Not
a
a
really
lot.
handy little tool?
Yeah, that's the reason I'll never be a good YouTuber is because most of my gadgets are not the kind of gadgets you'd make in your garage.
Okay.
No, no, most of them are take some pretty significant machinery and stuff.
And have you applied that kind of approach to the things that you make marks with, or are you just brushes and that's it?
No, no, just paint with traditional brushes and stuff. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because I've talked to some artists who have done very inventive things with spatulas and rubber things, and they've invented all these mark making tools that give them,
Oh,
you
no.
know, very unusual textures, you know.
Right, right. Nope, I'm just old school, just brushes.
All right. Just when you're talking about your kids there and teaching them, are you of the school, like some people are afraid to let kids have tools, particularly dangerous tools? And there's kind of two schools. There's like, no, let them have them, they'll figure it out. Or, no, you have to give them all the safety instructions and all this kind of thing. Where are you on that?
I'm afraid, but I do it anyway. So there's no, I mean, how could you not be afraid to have your kid on a table saw? But I did at a very young age let my kids use power tools. I just did it under supervision until I could see that they respected the tool.
Yeah,
And then I eventually let them do it on their own. But
yeah,
yeah, I was scared out of my mind. Those things are so dangerous.
I
But
know.
I mean, it was so beneficial to me to know how to use tools and to be self-sufficient. And I was so adamant about it too, because I was a leader in a youth program some years ago and was just mind blown. This is going to sound terrible, but I'm just going to say it, of how unbelievably unskilled these youth were and how they had absolutely no skills whatsoever. And it just was mind baffling to me that they didn't know how to do anything at all but play video games. And I thought when my kids get to be 10, 12, they are going to learn some skills. And I don't care what it is, but they've got to learn some skills. So I sort of just, you know, kind of swallowed my fear a little bit and just under supervision let them do what they wanted to do.
Yeah,
And it's paid
yeah,
off. I mean, they're very skilled kids.
yeah. Good for
So
you. Did you find in that group of kids, the unskilled kids, that there was a real thirst for it though, that they actually wanted to know how to do these things?
it varied. Some did, some
Okay.
didn't. Yeah, it varied,
Okay.
as you might expect. I mean, some kids wanted to learn some of the things that I could offer them, and some kids had interest in it. I think that it's just that, this is probably a major tangent, but what I came away with after having that responsibility was that we just live in a generation now where um, everything is just so easy that you could go through life without ever learning how to do anything for yourself. So parents aren't really emphasizing anything outside of an academic education. They're not emphasizing anything besides put your face in a book. I'm not saying that academics aren't good. I just think that a human being should be more well-rounded.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, in this generation, it just feels like, and maybe it was my generation too. Maybe I was just blessed. I don't know that my parents had to learn how to do things because we didn't have much, but maybe it's not generational. I don't know. But I believe that it's important to be well-rounded. I mean, there's nothing like the feeling of being able to take care of yourself and not being
Yeah.
dependent on other people. So yeah, I definitely wanted my kids to, despite the fact that it was scary sometimes teaching them things that might be a little dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you name your paintings?
Oh man, I'm bad at naming paintings because I developed this probably unhealthy pet peeve years ago where I felt like a painting should stand on its own without a name, and I think that was a bad move. I don't know where I got that from, and I remember early in my career, I would just name things like Untitled One, Untitled Two, Untitled Three. I mean, the most unbelievably uninteresting paintings. And to this day, like I mentioned, this my last painting that I completed, I literally just named it Crucifixion. I mean, I just have no imagination with names whatsoever. And I know it's one of my weaknesses. I could probably sell paintings better if I had a good name for them. I mean, every now and then I think I hit it and I do something that I feel like is authentic and it's not contrived, and yet it still says something about the painting. But oftentimes I find that a difficult balance to strike where you're not taking your painting too seriously and making this poetic title that the painting doesn't justify. And so
Right.
I tend to underdo it to avoid that coming off contrived. But I know that's a fault of my own. I knew an artist once who entered a religious show at a local museum, and he entered a painting of cows, and he named, and we were kind of laughing about it, and he named it, what did he call it? Something like God's Green Pastures or something, just to get into the show. But it was not a religious subject matter at all. He got in and won an award based
Wow.
on the title, right? So I came away from that with mixed feelings. Like, wait a minute, was that was that was that some sort of inauthentic way of cheating the system, or was that good business and creative thinking? And I still don't know.
It's probably both.
What do you think? I'm
Probably
curious.
both. Yeah. Yeah. Probably both.
Maybe. I still don't know. I still don't know. But it was
Yeah.
smart either way. So yeah, I
Yeah.
suck at doing paintings.
Well, a couple of things prompted there. You immediately reminded me of something I saw in a gallery many years ago, and it was a long string of barbed wire framed, and in Ireland, because there's a lot of sheep, you'll often see tufts of wool caught on the barbed wire, and on
Yeah.
this framed piece of barbed wire, there were little tufts of wool on the barbed parts of the barbed wire, and one of them, sort of, not in the middle, but a bit off to the one side, was had blood on it, and this
Wow.
piece was called The Last Supper, and I
Oh,
was
whoa.
like, it was really powerful, actually, because you're
Okay,
kind
so
of
that I can get behind. That's brilliant. That,
yeah.
and that's not a gift that I have. I mean, honestly, that's brilliant.
Yeah, because, I was harumping a bit, going, oh my God, barbed wire in a frame, God, what's the art world come to, all that. And I'm kind of looking along, yeah, a bit of wool, but well, that one's red. And then as you do, oh, what's it called? And then it's like, oh, and then it's like complete reframe. Like, oh, wow, okay, that's pretty powerful, actually.
Yeah, I'm not usually a fan of found art, but that's smart. That's a good one.
Yeah, and then of course I was like, oh yeah, one, two, three, yeah, there's 12 of them. Oh, okay, right, wow.
There were 12 tufts of wool or 12 barbs or what?
12, well, 13. I think it was 13. It fit with the name,
Right,
It's like,
right.
oh, okay, yeah.
Wow. That's
The other thing with names is, have you tried putting it out to social media? Like kind of going, oh, this is, anyone got any suggestions for what I should call this one?
No, I never have. I'll have to consider
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's one. And then
Have
there's
you
always
done that?
ChatGPT. No, I haven't.
Yeah.
I don't have any
Have the robot
trouble.
tell me. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I find ChatGPT is great for kind of. It's like having a bad writer. Like the hard thing about writing is the blank page, and ChatGPT gets you over the hump. It's like, it suggests something like, oh, for God's sake, that's a terrible suggestion, I'm going to go with this one, but it gives you something to
Oh.
push against, when it makes some bad suggestions for you.
Well, next
But
year it'll be good writers, so you won't even need that.
uh, I don't know. It's
Maybe
not. It's
10
not.
years.
It's not improving that quickly.
No, isn't it? I haven't even tried it. Can you believe that? I haven't even tinkered with it at all.
Yeah. Well, I probably wouldn't if I didn't need to. But yeah, no, I haven't. I've noticed it's. I sort of switched from kind of going, okay, ChatGPT, impress me, and to kind of going, oh, this isn't that good actually, to realizing, oh, okay, we got to teach it. It's kind of up to us. So now if I ask it for something and it doesn't give me what I want, I'll get into a thing with it and I'll go, yeah, that wasn't great. Have another go. And it'll have another go. And I go, yeah, I really like this one. Give me a few more suggestions around this one, and it's sort of, it's learning.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, my wife was tinkering around with it and she asked about me in it, and they got about half of it. ChatGPT got about half of it wrong.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, I could see how I could see it, I'm calling it a person. I could see how it would come up with those facts in quotes, but they weren't quite right. So yeah, it's not quite there yet.
Yeah, well, also, it only has knowledge up to 2021,
Oh,
because
really? I
that's
didn't know that.
yeah, that's when the data set was gathered. So anything beyond that,
Oh,
it doesn't have access to the internet. So beyond that, it doesn't
I
know.
thought
You
it
know.
did. I thought it was just scouring the internet for information.
No, no, it's just one huge data set. It's data set that was scraped back then. You know, 2020,
Oh,
2021 from. Well, that's one of the things that everyone's freaking out about. It's like, don't give it access to the internet. You know. But
oh, yeah,
yeah, I
excellent.
was writing a blog post about Barbenheimer at the weekend, and I kind of knew, but just out of curiosity, I asked it about it, you know, and it was like, I don't know what you're talking about, you know, and you know, it's
Huh.
definitely you can't be on the internet at the moment and not know about Barbenheimer, you know, so yeah.
Huh. Yeah, yeah, I'm clueless. I gotta get more informed.
Now, if you're thinking to yourself, God, I'm really enjoying this podcast. I've listened to a few now and they're brilliant. And there's so many of them. And I've learned so much from listening to them. And you know what? If I met that John Dalton fella in real life, I'd love to buy him a cup of tea and have a chat with him. I'd love to do that every month if I could. Well, now you can. The tea part at least, because this podcast runs on cups of tea bought for me by people like you who listen to the podcast and send me the price of a cup of tea once a month through the Patreon account. That's patreon.com/John Dalton Gently Does It. All one word. And if you're one of those people who already send me cups of tea through Patreon, thanks a million. The tea is lovely and I really appreciate it. Now, the great thing is that if you can't afford to send me the price of a cup of tea or you don't want to, that's fine. You still get exactly the same podcast for free. It's sort of an honor system where the people who can afford it and want to pay for the people who can't or don't want to. So it's all lovely. So if you'd like to send me a cup of tea once a month, you can do that through Patreon. I'd really appreciate it. It makes a huge difference to me. Amy Gibson in North Carolina says, big fan, love your work and your podcast. She's talking about you. Both of your DVDs were
Thank you.
extremely helpful. What painting are you working on now?
So I'm starting another biblical one of Christ in Gethsemane, and then I've got a family portrait that coming up, and then I'm starting. Actually, I'm working on a whole series of biblical work, the whole life of Christ. That's like a 20-year project. So if anyone ever wants to know what I'm working on now, it's going to be that for the next 20 years, one of those paintings. But I also am doing landscape painting on the side, just trying to become a better landscape painter. You won't see those paintings yet because I'm not there, so they end up in drawers. But and then just doodling and sketching and that kind of thing here and there. But my serious work, the work that's paying the bills, is typically either portrait commissions or the biblical series or Life of Christ series.
Okay, that is that a commission or is that something that comes from within you, but you know that people will want to buy
Um,
once they're finished?
no, it's actually an interesting thing. So one of my clients, so I've always had this dream to do the whole Life of Christ series without a client, and something that I really had, that I could really put my whole heart and soul in and not be inhibited at all. And but also something that could all hang together in large scale and in a public collection. And one of my clients is very supportive of this dream, and they set up a foundation. And then I've had some rich donors put money into the foundation, and they're helping me to pay to make these paintings. Um, and so, yeah, it's been a huge blessing. So I make these paintings, the foundation owns the paintings. And then when the paintings are all in the foundation, then the foundation will find a place for the paintings to hang that's public.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really quite a blessing.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And
Uh,
quite, man, and it's seriously, it's a blessing because it's something I've always wanted to do, and I can't believe it's actually happening. I mean, it's been a long time in the making. I mean, 20, it was in 2008. For those of the people who've been following me for a really long time, they might know that in 2008, I completely shifted the way my paintings look. I was doing this really kind of pop art style of figurative painting. It was very much influenced by Wayne Thiebaud. and like Barnett Newman and some other classical modernists. Um, and when I say classical modernists, what I mean is modernists that are doing very geometric, clean shapes. Um, and I don't even know if that's the right term for it, but I've heard it's put that way. But anyway, so I was doing that, and then in 2008, I just kind of was like, I felt like I was bored of it. So I wanted to reinvent myself and kind of figure out how to paint more like the old masters so that I could really put my whole energy into doing this biblical thing that I just mentioned.
Mm.
And so since 2008 till now, so 15 years, I've been preparing for this whole thing. And so I guess not 15 because it's been going, the whole thing has been building up since I'd say before COVID. But um, so I'd say at least 12 or 13 years I was practicing, learning how to paint more classically, trying to get myself ready to do this thing. And now it's actually happening. And it's kind of like, it's amazing that it's actually going to happen. So it's, yeah, literally a dream come true.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Christine Grace Nagel in Brisbane, Australia says, can't wait to listen. Thanks, John. You're welcome, Christine. Jeff, your paintings are so diverse in subject matter and stylistically. Can you please speak on this and what is important to your art? And what is important to your art making if it isn't finding a coherent artist voice in inverted commas? I hope this makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting because I just interviewed Ron Hicks on my podcast, and he talked about the truth, how an artist has truth and their truth. And I remember leaving that conversation thinking, man, I wonder if I have a truth because I do feel like I'm all over the board, and I don't disagree with him. And I do think he had said in my own work, I think he was being polite, but he had said that if he saw all of my work, he would see a common thread. And he's right. There is a common thread, and that is that I cannot authentically paint consistently like someone else, even though I could mimic someone else if I chose to. I keep making the same marks. I keep making the same micro decisions. So while my subject matter changes and even my quote unquote style changes, if you really look closely at a painting, you'll be able to tell it's mine because of how it's been painted. So I just have very diverse tastes. And I personally feel like all of them are who I am. It's just, I'm not happy just being confined into one tiny little box. I'm not happy with that in painting alone, even. And I have to be making things. I have to be doing metalwork and leatherwork and woodwork and building my van and all this other stuff, or I'm not happy. And I'm certainly not happy doing the same kind of paintings day after day. And that is and after a lot of thought after that interview with Ron, that is, if you want to put it this way, my truth. And my truth is that I have very diverse interests. And it's funny too because I live in a 130-year-old Victorian house, which isn't that old by European standards. So, John, you probably aren't impressed, but in the United States, it's a pretty old house. But but my wife and I have been talking lately. If we ever built, we would build modern, like really modern, clean lines. And I have my studio is like this cool warehouse with raw brick, and it's 110 years old. But then upstairs is really modern. And so even in my environments, I'm constantly mixing the two because I love the old, but I also love the new. And I don't want to just have one. And I don't want to be confined into one. And I'm not, so I just go wherever I feel like going. And the only thing that's cohesive is my temperament and my mannerisms and how I actually move the paint around and those, as I put it, those little micro decisions. Those things are what tie all the work together. But the styles, I want them to be diverse because my interests are diverse.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a common response that I've come across to that kind of question about finding your voice seems to be, don't worry about it. Like if you stress it or you try and find your voice, you won't. It's like splashing for a life raft, or that ring thing they throw in the water. If you splash towards it too much, you push it away, and you find your voice by not thinking about it too much and just doing, as you say, just doing what you are drawn to or what you enjoy doing, and then someone else will be able to tell you, like Ron was able to tell you, like that he could pick your work out, or could see the common thread
Right.
in it. Have
Right.
you found that a
I
similar kind of
100%
thing
agree
with
with
the
that.
artists you talk to?
Absolutely. Everyone I've talked to that is that certainly everyone I've had on my podcast where this has come up has agreed with that statement. And I think I've seen it and I've done it where, I mean, early when I was still in school and really trying hard to be somebody, I did the most silly, contrived things. I'll confess one thing I did that was so stupid. Oh my gosh, it was so stupid. I was still in school and I wanted to be different and I wanted to find my voice, so to speak. And I got this aluminum sheet and I crinkled it up and I painted a still life on it. And then I mounted it to a board and hung it without a frame. Now, did it look kind of cool? Maybe, but what it really was some stupid trick. It was just dumb and contrived. And I was trying too hard. And at the time, I just thought I discovered the coolest thing ever. But I hadn't. I was trying too hard. And it's kind of embarrassing to even admit that I did something so stupid. But you see it all the time, and not to be critical about artists, but you see these contrived things all the time where young artists are trying so hard to find their voice that they do the silliest things, and it's just like, just paint. Stop thinking so hard about it. Just paint. And if you're a person like me who's got really diverse tastes, you might find, and I'm not the only one. I mean, I've had conversations with Kwang Ho about this. Kwang Ho has got a million different voices. You might find that you have lots of different tastes, but what you won't be able to get rid of is are your own mannerisms and your own subtle tendencies. Those things are 100% you, but from painting to painting, you might change a lot, and that's fine. But like I agree, don't try so hard. You're just going to come up with some silly stuff like I did.
Yeah, I think it comes down to seeing the difference between being an artist and being a painter. And you'll probably see this with because you teach so much that, you can teach anyone to paint, but you can't teach anybody how to be an artist. Like that's just something that's part of who they are. And it's something that you either know about yourself or you have to discover it about yourself. But like you can come across paintings that are technically not great, but they're fantastic paintings because the artistry in them, it's a bit of a mess, but it's a fantastic mess. And similarly, across all kinds of, it doesn't matter what kind of artistic expression it is. If the person is if the artistry is coming through, it's usually great, regardless of the technical side of it. And I think that once you make the separation, because it feels like these kind of things about finding your voice is where they're conflating those two things about, being an artist and being a painter, where they kind of know that they're technically not that great, and they think if I can just get technically great, I'll become a great artist. Like, well, if you start off with I am a great artist, and this is just the vehicle that I'm learning how to get better at expressing that artistry, then you've got a much better chance of it coming through, I think. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, I don't know if you're wrong, but I will tell you what I think is a little bit different, but I don't know if I'm right. Just like I don't know if you're wrong. I don't I still don't know if I'm an artist. That's where I might disagree. In fact, it's I feel like if I die feeling like an artist, I will be pretty satisfied. But to me, it's I mean, I look at the people that I truly think of as artists out there, and they're just spectacular. The things they make are just so beautiful. and it's hard to see yourself that way. So I get this whole have a positive attitude. I don't disagree with that. I think we should see ourselves, we should try and throw ourselves a bone, give ourselves some slack. But my attitude personally has been give yourself all the tools you can possibly give yourself, be as well trained as you can possibly be, and then shoot for the stars. Just like try and be that artist. And if you keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it, I think we all have the potential to get there. I don't necessarily buy into the thing that we're all artists and we just need to follow our voice. I don't know if I buy into that or not. Um,
I'm thinking of the end of Exit Through the Gift Shop. Have you seen that documentary?
I did, but I don't remember it very well. No, remind me what you're thinking of.
Well, at the beginning, there's the interview with Banksy, and he's talking about the guy, Big Mister W, or I can't remember the guy's name. This enthusiastic guy who was following him around, and he was kind of going, "Oh, look, everyone's an artist. You just got to express it, you know." And then you go through the whole story and how this guy unconsciously sort of plays the whole art system, has this big sellout show in a warehouse, and at the end Banksy's going, yeah, I used to say to people we're all artists and you should just express it. Yeah, no, I don't say that so much.
Yeah.
And I thought it was
Yeah,
really good.
yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And I know occasionally I see things on Instagram. There's this one place I follow that is constantly sharing quotes, and they'll say something like, when you something this is totally off the top of my head. They didn't actually say this. I don't remember, but something like this. Like, when you get up in the morning, tell yourself you're an artist and then you'll be one, or something like that. And I always cringe a little when I hear that, because I just don't believe that. It's like,
Yeah,
that's like me waking up in the morning and saying, tell yourself you're a doctor this morning and you'll be one. Like,
yeah,
no, no, it's way more complicated than that.
yeah.
It's so freaking hard. Literally had surgeons as students who said to me, making art is harder than going to medical school. It's harder than everything I've done before this. And I'm not saying it is. That's what they said. This person said, but it's the point is, at least to one doctor, art making is really hard. And I just don't think we all wake up or come out of the womb artists. I think it's a lot of freaking work, a lot of work, and some genetics. I mean, I think
Yes.
some people have an aptitude for it. And I've told this story before, but this to me is what I mean. Okay. I don't necessarily know if I'm an artist yet, so don't take this the wrong way. But I know that there are levels. In some things in the world, there is a spectrum, and art is one of those things. Some of us are more than others, right? More artistic than others. But my dad, like I said, he could build anything. And he could, I mean, anything. I always admired him growing up. He could build our house from the ground up, wire it, plumb it, fix the car, and make anything. And I remember one time when I was 12 years old, though, I was sitting in the garage with him, or standing in the garage with him, and he was building a cabinet for my mom, which goes to my point earlier. He had to build a cabinet because we couldn't afford to buy cabinets. So he built a cabinet for my mom's kitchen. And I remember at 12 years old looking at my dad's cabinet and thinking the rails and stiles looked poorly proportioned, and going, Dad, he's a grown man. He's 30 years older than me, 29. So that would have made him 51, right? Um, and he's wait, did I get that math right? No, 41, excuse me. So then he's a grown man. He's got these rails and stiles, and they just feel off balance. If I remember right, they were all the same width, and I felt like the bottom one should be thicker. Don't know why I felt that way, but turns out that's kind of standard. And he's like, no, Jeff, it looks fine. It looks fine. And it did look fine. But I remember thinking, ooh, Dad, what are you thinking? And I'd never gone to school for aesthetics or design or anything else. But for some reason, to me, even as a little kid, I had this sense of aesthetics that my father, who was an amazing craftsman, didn't have. So even though he could build everything he built wasn't beautiful. It was well made, but not beautiful. To me, that's the
Yeah.
difference. There's craftsmanship, And then there's art.
Yeah.
You can be an amazing craftsman, meaning everything is pristine, perfect dovetails, perfect mortise and tenon joints, perfect everything, pristine. It'll hold up to an earthquake. It'll hold up to a nuclear bomb. It's just so well built, but it's ugly,
Yep.
right? And if you're an artist, then you can't settle for ugly. It just
Yep.
makes your skin crawl. It's like
Yep.
you just can't do it. It's not good enough to just be strong or just be functional. It has to be beautiful. It has to be elegant. It has to be well proportioned.
Yep.
And that kind of stuff, I don't think you're born with that. You might be able to acquire it by looking at enough beautiful stuff, but I certainly don't think everyone's an artist. I just don't believe it.
Yeah.
But maybe
Which
I'm
is
wrong.
kind of no, no. Well, that's kind of what I was saying, and I was kind of reminded of that. You know, the famous Ira Glass thing about the gap between your eye or your taste and your skills. And it's kind of that's more where I'm kind of coming from. Is like often people focus on their skills and kind of go, oh, my voice is not coming through because I am not able to express it. It's more kind of coming from this thing of if there's a million things you could do in life. If you're drawn to this thing, no pun intended, if you're want to make paintings, then that's the thing that drives you forward. And yeah, sure, some people's eye is terrible. They can appreciate great art. You see it on Instagram all the time. And I get a lot of stick for saying this, but you see, you know, it's like, don't they have a friend? Don't they have someone they can say, I'm thinking of putting this on Instagram. Do you think this is any good? And they don't have anyone go, no, keep practicing, you're not there yet. That they cannot see their own work. Like for myself, it feels like a bit of a curse because it takes a lot for me to get to a point with the painting where I'm happy with it. Because I can see it
Yeah,
very
same.
clearly for what it is. And I've no I've no, I don't, I've no rose tinted glasses about my own work or anybody else's either. I have to say, and but like, I don't know whether yeah, I think that's the artist in me coming out, and from what you're talking about, I mean, you being able to see that, looking at your father's thing at that age, kind of going, yeah, it's not great. That to me is, the artist in you coming out and just kind of go, you can't unsee it. You can't kind of, I'm sure, you did not want to think like that with your father, who you love, and you see how skillful he is. But, your eye, I call it my ruthless eye, is like, that's just not, it doesn't look good.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And that's why I say it is a spectrum though, because obviously to even say that story, I see myself as more of an artist than someone, right? And I feel terrible saying that. I love my dad to death. He is so great. He's such a great craftsman. And being an artist is not the only great thing to be. Like being a great craftsman is worth its weight in gold, right? So,
Mm,
but so again, I think there is a spectrum. So clearly I had a better eye than my dad, but I want the eye of Rembrandt. I want the eye of Waterhouse. I want the eye of John Solomon J. Solomon. I want, you know what I mean? My God, I kill for that.
yeah.
And that's why I say I don't know if I'm an artist. I mean, compared to who?
Yeah, but those people you mentioned are geniuses, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Genius artists.
it's
They're at the top of the art game. I mean,
yeah.
they're
I came across a great quote about genius, and I can't remember what it is, but it's something along the lines of, like great people, create things that other people can't. Geniuses create things that other people don't even know exist. That didn't even know were
that's a good
possible.
quote.
I'm misquoting it, but it's along the lines. They're sort of seeing something that isn't there, and that's when and you can see that in all things, and it's such a beautiful thing when you see it. But I think that's slightly different to being an artist. They're
Yeah,
genius
maybe I'm
artists.
thinking a genius is synonymous with artist. Maybe I'm putting too much weight on the term, but um I think that's probably what's happening there is I feel like when I can finally say I'm an artist is when I've hit that level of art, that level of genius, as you put it, where it's I'm making things that no one could have imagined being made. And
Mm, mm.
that's a great quote.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so true. Like, when you think about anybody who's done something now, it's always in hindsight. It's like, oh yeah, like say Caravaggio or Rembrandt. We look at it in hindsight, but before they made it, that's the thing I always think about. Like before they made it, they just created this thing out of thin air. That's the genius part at work.
Yeah. And they did it in a time where they didn't have all the technology that we have to help us. I mean, and that just makes it that much more impressive. The things that they could do in the 19th century. Yeah, they had photography, but it was not like we have today. I mean, it was pretty crude. So, yeah, they were truly incredible geniuses.
Yeah, yeah. Bethan Moran Hanslick. Sorry if I
Hey, I love her.
how do you pronounce her surname?
Hanslick?
Okay, good. In Wisconsin. Says,
Yeah.
thank you, John, for the podcast, and what a wonderful guest. Would you ask Jeff if he consciously works to evoke the unique dignity of each person he portrays, or does it come about through the process of evolving the portrait and getting to know something of the person he's painting?
Um, uh, wow. That's a complicated question. Because, you know, I probably shouldn't be so transparent, but one of my one of my pet peeves as a portrait painter is this notion that when a portrait painter sits down with a model, they're capturing the spirit of the model, as though an artist can physically see the spirit of a model, as though there's something that an artist can see that the rest of the world can't see. Um, I think of it much more analytically than that. And I often think of art as like a science in a way. And what I mean by that is if I spend enough time with a person, I will start to see certain mannerisms, the way they hold their face, the way they hold their mouth most often. I have a kind of a scowl resting face, which you can see right now. I'm always scowling, right? And you start if someone's relaxed and you're with them long enough, you start to pick up on these things. And that's the beauty of working from life too. And if you're looking hard enough and you're paying attention, you capture them. And that's when you capture the person. But what you're capturing is not their spirit. You're capturing what they present to the world most frequently and most commonly. And then everyone else will recognize it because that's what they're accustomed to seeing. They're saying, oh, yes, that is Sarah. That is the Sarah I know. And the reason you say that is because it's not only the Sarah you know, it's the Sarah that I become acquainted with because I've really paid attention. So, in that sense, to me, that's that's how I capture the essence of a person is just really paying attention to what they're presenting to me and what they generally present to the world in their face.
Very good. Um, Lance Cowrie in South Africa says, hi, John. I'm very appreciative of both these podcasts and would love to know what Jeff is considering when he creates an abstract background for his portraits. Such incredible portraits.
Um, so what am I considering? Well, just simply design. There's nothing more than that. I mean, I guess sometimes the abstract background can serve the narrative. In my portraits, I'm always after a narrative. Well, not always. In my family portraits, 9 times out of 10, I'm after a narrative. That's what I love about doing them is creating a story that describes the family dynamic. And so if I can use the background to separate aspects or unify aspects of the painting in such a way that it helps aid the narrative, then I'll do that. Otherwise, it's simply design. I need more visual weight here, less visual weight there. I need a little splash of color here, a little splash of color there. I need higher contrast here, higher contrast there. I mean, that's primarily the reason for it. And again, like I said earlier, I just love color, and having this abstract background is a way to just play with color freely and not have to think about painting things, and which is pretty labor intensive.
Very good. Deb Bates in Canada says, I see artists show works in progress, in inverted commas. Many I admire, but they obviously project their images by seeing every single line on their substrate. How do you feel about this?
Well, as you know, I already touched on this a little bit. I personally don't do it because I want to be able to maintain my drawing skills. So even if I have a deadline and someone's breathing down my neck, which is rare, but it has happened where I'm feeling a lot of pressure to get something finished, I still will not take a shortcut like that, because I just feel like I'm doing myself a disservice by not practicing drawing. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize, particularly when you're doing complex paintings, like I'm doing complex meaning large and large paintings, um, is that you can spend a lot of time not doing a lot of drawing. So because you're just trying to fill a canvas. And so you could spend days or weeks not practicing drawing. And so if I have an opportunity to draw and I don't take it, then I might have missed my opportunity for the next few weeks or months. And it's really critical to me that I draw when I can draw and I don't take shortcuts.
Very good. Because as I've just discovered, the more you draw, the better you'll paint.
Mm-hmm. That's my theory anyway.
No, I think that's very good. Okay, so a couple of questions about abstraction. Ladrake2003 on Instagram, that's the only name they had, says, I love listening to Jeff interview artists. I'd be interested to know more about his relationship to abstract art. He's demonstrated a strong interest in it, and it sounds like he gets a little bored with his current mode of painting. Would he consider branching off into some level of abstraction? And if so, would it be with portraiture or something more like landscape? I've heard him describe his customized van for painting on location. Thanks very much. And then Galen Ribiera on Patreon, thanks for the tea, Galen, says, this will be a real treat to hear a conversation between two of my favorite podcast hosts. Thank you, John, for inviting Jeff to come on here. You're welcome. I've followed Jeff's work since I was an undergrad in 2005 and continue to be inspired by his teaching demonstrations at the Portrait Society of America and, of course, his podcast interviews. Jeff, based on your podcast conversations, I wonder if you plan to experiment with a more abstracted realism in your own work. So they're both
there's
kind of the
two
same.
people asked that question.
Yeah, they're both kind of the same.
No, I will never go to completely abstract. If I do, I can't even imagine it ever happening. I absolutely love painters who combine realism with abstraction. And I do appreciate abstract painting, but I don't value abstract painting in and of itself in the same way that I do abstract painting when it is combined with realism. Don't ask me why. It's just my personal taste. So I absolutely love it, and the way it's applied, like the way Zoe Frank applies it, or the way, who's another example?
Ron Hicks, you were just
Aaliyah
talking about.
Chapin, Ron Hicks, Aaliyah Chapin. These are some artists that just freaking blow my mind, and it's so beautiful, the marriage between the two. And it's what I experimented with for years before I kind of moved away from a little, and still do it with my portrait commissions. But just doing abstract by itself, I would talk about boredom. I would be bored out of my mind just doing abstract on myself. Not because it's a boring medium, but because it doesn't fit my temperament, or a boring subject, but it just doesn't fit my temperament. I feel like the way my mind works, I kind of am an artist with more of an engineering mind. And if I'm not physically creating something that has form and structure and actually exists, I'm not in my element. Yeah. So I don't think I could move away from it completely without feeling bored, which is ironic because that one question suggested I was feeling bored. And he's not wrong. He or she is not wrong. That's just because I'm chronically bored, which is why I have so many hobbies. It has nothing to do with my choice in subject matter. It's that, and I've often said this to people and they don't believe it, but I don't even really like painting that much. I don't like doing anything that much. I literally, my main motivation for getting up in the morning is to accomplish something. I am not, when people say to me, oh, I just paint for the love of painting. That just, I can't even fathom that. I don't even get it. Like
Well, it's
what
all
is it
coming out
about it?
here, folks.
Yeah. I mean, what is it about it? Is it this movement that you enjoy? Like, I don't get it. Like it's so for me, and I'm not, I mean, it sounds like I'm making fun of people. I'm not. I'm actually envious, but I don't enjoy any of the hobbies I have. What I enjoy is the ability to accomplish something, the ability to, make something out of metal, leather, wood, steel, like fiberglass, paint. Like what I enjoy is the finished product and being able to say, I made that, but I I don't really care about the process. So abstract painting is all about process. It's like playing in paint. It's so outside of my temperament. I can't imagine ever getting going there 100%.
Have you ever had a go?
Yeah, I've tried it. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
can't say it's there is some pleasure in it, but yeah, it's just so outside of my temperament. Again, I don't want anyone listening to this podcast to misunderstand. I really enjoy looking at abstract painting. It's just it's like anything else. I also enjoy watching certain sports, but doesn't mean I'm qualified to paint them or play them. It's just not in my DNA.
Yeah, yeah. I had a go as well. I was surprised at how hard it was. I
It's
think
hard. It's really hard.
yeah. I think like when you were talking about that surgeon who said painting's really hard. I kind of thought, well, realistic painting or figurative painting, it's so difficult. This has got to be easier. I should be able to knock this out. It's so hard. Couldn't
It's
believe
hard
it.
because you have nothing, you have no end goal, no objective end goal. And so you never know when you're done. You never know if you could make it better. You never know if you've reached the end of the project. If I'm painting a portrait, at least have somewhat of an objective goal,
Yeah.
make it look like the person. I mean, it's not that simple. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but it's at least a little more objective. With an abstract
Mm.
painting, you could be done before you put a stroke down. You could literally say, I'm done. It's a white canvas. I'm done. Or you could paint on it for 10 years and still not be done. But who's to say one was right and one was wrong? There's no objective way to measure. And that's what makes it so hard
Yep.
for me anyway. And totally out of my wheelhouse. I can't imagine ever being comfortable in that zone.
Yep. How do you deal with self doubt?
Cry, drugs, just kidding. um so I have That's a good question. Are you asking me that, or was someone actually asked that on the?
I ask everyone this now.
Oh, you do. Okay, that's a good question. Because I have plenty of self doubt. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on this. So I have a weird mix of this sort of dichotomy in my brain, and where I'm extremely confident, very confident to the point that my wife thinks I'm an arrogant a-hole sometimes. But then, but then I'm also very insecure. So, and I'm not like, I can't see myself as an artist, as we already talked about. I just don't
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm there. I feel like I suck at painting. I want to quit all the time because I don't feel like I'm any good. But yet I also have this little voice inside of me that says, Jeff, you can do anything. There's nothing you can't do. And they sort of like, they it doesn't make sense that I can have both of those voices in my head at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I'm fortunate to have the second one, the one that says, Jeff, you can do anything. Because when I'm feeling like crap, like I'm never going to be an artist, and like I just want to quit, I always go back to the other one saying, Jeff, you've proven that if you try hard enough, you can do stuff. Like you can learn things, you can do whatever you put your mind to. You've proven that. Just keep your head down, keep working, you'll get there.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm fortunate to have that little voice. I can't imagine living in just that other zone. It would be really difficult because it's difficult enough when you have the secondary voice telling you you can do anything you want. So
You can't
anyway,
imagine
that's
living
how
it.
I deal with it.
You can't imagine living in the space of that you're terrible. Is that the one you meant?
Yeah, that you're just insecurity, where you just have total
Okay.
self-doubt.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
imagine that. I know people like that and I feel for those people. I can't imagine just living in that space. And I mean, I'm there in half of me is there on a regular basis, but the other half of me is like, what? No, you can do anything you want. And so that part is sort of my savior. It's just like constantly lifting me up. Like, don't forget, Jeff, you can do whatever you want. And so I'm fortunate to have that.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, and thank you for your honesty. And so many people listening who know your work will be just so relieved to hear you say that you deal with the same kind of insecurities that they deal with. And that's one of the beautiful things that both you and I do in our podcast. That we talk to people and they get to hear these people, artists who they think are fantastic, and would have no. If I could just paint like that person for a day, I wouldn't have any worries. And they're like, they've got exactly the same thing going on inside as you do. It's so helpful. I've had so many people get in touch, as I'm sure you have as well, to just say, I was so pleased to hear that they deal with exactly the same things I do.
Yeah, I know it is nice to know you're not insane, or at least you're not the only insane one out there. You're in good company with all the other insane people.
Okay, so when I have a woman artist on who has kids, invariably I get this question about how do you balance being a mother and being an artist? And when I have a man who's an artist and has kids, I never get that question. So I always like to ask it because it's important, I think, to address it. So, as you mentioned, you've just got the two kids, or more?
I have three. Yeah, I
You've
mentioned the
three.
two because my third one, we talked about homeschooling a little bit. My third one refused to homeschool. So he doesn't hang out at the studio with me. He wants to be in school, which is understandable because he's 3.5 years younger than the twins. The twins had each other. So
Hmm.
they were comfortable being in school together, whereas he's all by himself. So
Yeah.
he's like, I'm not having it. So he's in regular school. But yeah, three. So I have a 16-year-old and two 19-year-olds.
Okay. So, just practically, if you think about, the way I framed it, how did you practically handle the day to day, childcare side of things and be an artist? How did that work for you?
So for most of my career, I would say, yeah, except for the first year. I was still in college when we had our twins. And then a year after, I might be getting this wrong. Let me think here. No, I wasn't still in college. So we had our twins in 2003, and my wife was working, and I was working as a handyman, and then I got a job doing right out of school. I got a job part time for an animation studio because I made the mistake of telling my wife that someone had offered me a job at an animation studio. And she said, Jeff, take the freaking job. It's an art job. Just take it. So I took it for 2 months. I hated it, even though it was a great job. I just didn't want to be an animator. So I quit. And then for the year with the twins, it was a little scary because even though my wife was working, I had to come home and help take care of the kids half the day. And then she'd come home and take care of the kids. And then I went and rented a small studio. But after the first year, my wife quit her job and I was able to support my family from then on out. So for the past 18 years, I've been supporting them. And so my wife, I've been really blessed that my wife's been able to stay home and take care of the kids, and I could really focus on work. And I mean, obviously, I'm involved in their lives, but I didn't have to worry about splitting up my time between daycare and and raising the kids. But that said, because of our situation, I have a studio outside the home, and my studio is actually bigger than my house, and we have like this little living room area upstairs. And my kids did their homeschooling from eighth grade to seniors in my studio. So for a lot of years, my twins, my wife, I was the one raising the kids while doing the work because I wanted them to be in the studio environment and learning new skills. That was fine. It was great. It was a huge blessing to be with my kids at that time, but it was a little more challenging because, I was in the middle of something and I'd have my kids being like, Dad, I want to make something out of da da da. Or Dad, where's the peanut butter? Or, just random stuff. But it was a huge blessing too. So, I'm really glad you asked that question though, because in this day and age, it's so different. It doesn't just apply to women anymore because a lot of times men are staying home and women are the ones working. You just never know. Every family's different. But with our family, it was really traditional.
Yeah,
Other than the fact that my kids came here, my wife has really been really cool about being a stay-home mom and taking care of the family while I worked.
brilliant, brilliant. Do you have a dog?
We have two dogs. Yeah.
Okay. Just when you
Yeah.
said peanut butter, it reminded me of this thing, a little video. You know the way as you're going and thing. This little video today. Have you ever tried to clip your dog's nails? You know how
Yeah,
like
it's awful.
they don't like it. Well, this person
No.
came up with this genius hack, right? And they started off with Glad wrap. They wrapped the top of their head in Glad wrap, and they put peanut butter on their forehead.
I
And
saw that.
did you
That
see
was
that?
brilliant.
So while they're
Yes.
clipping the dog's nails, the dog is fascinated and licking their forehead. I thought, wow, that's
Yeah, that's
genius.
brilliant. I wish I could make that last long enough to cut my dog's hair because I have a miniature poodle and it's brutal trying to cut their hair. I wonder if I can make that hack work for that. I doubt it.
Yeah. Well, I tried it with, I've got two Scottish Terriers. I tried it initially, but then I switched to what you were saying earlier on about if there's and someone else has made this thing and it's easier, I'll let them do it. So I just bring them to a nice lady. She takes care of it and they come out looking
Yeah,
great. They're happy. I'm happy. And they don't think I'm the bad guy. So I'm all right.
that's what I do too. That's what I do
Yeah.
too. But it'd be nice to save the cash. They're expensive.
David Kaysen, wonderful artist, former podcast
Oh yeah.
guest, episode 31, if you're looking for it, says, is it the image slash painting that is the end game or the journey to make it, to make the work that is most important aspect to you?
Oh, well, I think I already answered that. And I
You
think I
did.
answered it really obnoxiously. Yeah, it's definitely the end game because the process is often grueling. And one thing I should mention too is it's not, I've found that when I go plein air painting, I actually really enjoy the process, but it's partly because I'm outside. It's beautiful weather. I hear the birds and all the just sounds of nature. I'm usually with a friend or a student who I enjoy their company. And then it lasts 3 hours and I'm done. Part of the reason that painting is so much like work for me is because some of my paintings take over a year to paint. So I get so sick of looking at them after a while. And it just becomes very, very, just a lot like work. But I still love it because I love the cause, so to speak. I mean, I feel like I'm doing something that's meaningful to me, even though it's difficult. So I still love doing it, just not necessarily the day to day mark making.
Yeah. Well, that ties nicely into my next question, which I kind of call my desert island question, right? Which maybe you've heard, maybe you haven't. So you're on a desert island, right? Your food is
Hmm.
taken care of, your shelter is taken care of. You don't have to do any of that kind of stuff. And you've got any kind of art supplies that you want and reference. Would you still make art that no one was ever going to see but you? No one's coming to this desert island. That's it. You're
Whoa.
there.
You ask this question a lot because I've heard your podcast. I don't remember this question.
Yeah.
Um,
I've been asking for about 2 years, 2 or 3 years.
do you always ask it at the end? Because a lot of times I don't get
In
all
the
the way
middle.
through podcast. Okay.
In the middle.
Let me see. Um, God, now I'm feeling guilty. I don't know if I'd paint. I have to really think about that. Do I paint for myself or do I paint? I don't think I paint for the viewer. Um, what? Okay, I got to ask you. Let me turn it on you. What would you say?
I'd say I'll answer when you have answered. But
um,
good stall. Well done. Good try.
no, I could. Okay, okay. Here's what I think I would do. I think I would be the exact same person I am now. Because honestly, a lot of the things I do, no one gets see. I mean, I can honestly say that a lot of things I do, I've got drawers and drawers full of landscape paintings that no one sees. Drawers full,
Yeah,
drawers and drawers full of drawings that no one sees. And people always ask me, why do you do it if you're not selling? I'm like, I don't know. It's
yeah,
just kind of it's in my DNA.
yeah,
So I think I can. I think the only reason I hesitate is because it's a revealing question. It makes you really contemplate why you do what you do.
yeah,
But and I don't and I can't answer it just based on emotion. I have to look at my patterns because you know how it is. You can't know how you'll feel when you're in a situation. My patterns tell me that I would do it anyway. I can
yeah.
imagine myself on an island looking around for things to make. I'd probably make another shelter just for kicks, but then I'd also find time to draw paint. I have the
Yeah,
coolest Swiss Family Robinson fort in the trees you'd ever seen in your life. I
yeah.
promise.
Lots of gadgets. Yeah, yeah. But I'm not surprised with your answer because I that what you were saying, that drive like to make to you've got this you know almost unreachable goal of being able to in some small way be able to capture even something slightly close to something that Rembrandt might have done. That's going to keep you going for the rest of your life, as
Yeah.
many artists that I talk to, So, like, just because you're on a desert island, that's not going to disappear, Once you get used to it and, you've built the second shelter or whatever and all the gadgets you want, that would naturally just come back and you just continue on. And in some ways, well, actually, the follow on question then from that is, okay, so you've realized that you will keep painting. Do you think you would be painting the same sorts of things, or would it change?
Oh, absolutely. I'm painting exactly what I want to be painting.
Yeah,
I am a 100% stickler about not painting what people want me to paint. And people might argue, but you're doing commissions and it's like it's not what commissions don't have to be what people think they are. For example, with my family portraits are some of my favorite things to do. And I'm disappointed if I don't have one lined up because they're so much fun to paint. And the reason why is because kind of like the Bible, it gives me a starting point. It gives me something. It's like, I don't want to do woodwork, for example, for the sake of woodwork. I want a bed to make, or I want a nightstand that I need, or I want a coffee table that I need. I don't just want to glue wood together. Right. And I feel the same way about painting. You give me something, give me a subject that I find interesting, and then let me run with it. And that to me is exciting, and the Bible does that. Families do that because of course I love my own family, so I have fun with the kind of playing with humor with other people's family dynamics. So they give me their family, I say, okay, you're going to I'm going to interview each of you about each other, not about yourselves, because I want authentic descriptions, right? I'm going to interview each of you about each other, and I'm going to come up with a narrative, and then I'm going to pick out your clothes out of things you're willing to wear, and I'm going to design everything myself, and so on and so forth. So it's 100% my own work. The only thing that's not is that it's their family. And so I just have a blast. And honestly, if I was on a desert island, I'd probably be looking for another stranded family to paint. For that reason, I really enjoy it. And then as
yeah,
far as the biblical stuff, I mean, I literally took a 3-year sabbatical to prepare myself for it. So it's definitely something I'm passionate about. I can't imagine that I would ever do anything different.
yeah. That's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you.
just going back to commissions, how do you manage expectations with commissions? I've heard, I've talked to lots of different artists about commissions, and they all have, some have very clever ways of managing expectations. I'm just curious what you do.
Well, expectations are higher with official portraits. So I don't do a lot of those. I mean, I don't do a lot of portrait commissions anyway, but official ones, I think I've only done maybe 4 or 5. And those are the most challenging because then you're painting an individual of some level of importance. And even if these people are humble, which all the clients I've had have been amazing, all of us are insecure about how we look. So, if I'm painting a single person for themselves for a public space, they're going to be, I would be, they're going to be a little insecure about hanging in a public space and everyone looking at their face. So that's kind of a trickier subject, and I rarely have those, so I don't really deal with it that much. Family portraits are different because it's hanging in their home. Usually, the parents are commissioning the kids, and the kids aren't going to care. And all you got to do is get it to look exactly like the kids, which is relatively easy to do. And then the parents come in and start bawling their eyes out. I mean, it's so easy to make them happy. I've never had a dissatisfied family client for a family portrait. Never. Now with private ones, I mean with the oh, what's the term I used? I forgot now. The official portraits.
Mm.
I have had clients where they're like I had a person come in once and their spouse was like, "No, you look good in it. You look good in it." And they're like, "Oh gosh, is that what I look like?" And they're like, "Yo, you look good. You look good." And I'm just sitting there really uncomfortable, like, I don't know what else to do. But that's different, like I said, because it's them who's
Yeah.
getting it done. And I
Yeah.
don't love doing those. I often turn down official portraits for that reason. It's not the kind of portrait I like. I'm not passionate about it like I am families.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not narrative, they're not as fun. So I generally turn those down unless they're really prestigious, and then I find that good for, it might be good for my career to do those. So I only take the real prestigious ones.
Yeah. You talked about your students. What are the main kind of things you've learned from teaching?
Oh man, teaching's great. So I'd said earlier that you could go weeks or months without drawing if you're doing ambitious paintings. Well, that's only true if you're not teaching. So I would say daily I'm drawing for my students because they will, I have this system in my studio. My room is right next to their room, and the doors are literally open between ours. So they can see me working, I can see them working. They can hear my conversation, I can hear theirs. But so that I can remember when they need help, I have this little buzzer on my door. They ring it, I hear it, and then a light stays on. And then that light will stay on until I go out and help them and turn it back off. And that's so that when I take a break, I'll remember that someone needs help because I forget. So, and the other reason is because what they used to do is just stand by me while I'm painting and just sit there and wait, looking over my shoulder and making me really uncomfortable. And so, so I'd be like, I don't mind them watching me paint, but when I know they need help and they're watching me paint, I can't focus. So I just, all right, fine, I'll come critique you. So they'll ring the bell, and then I'll go out and help them. And 9 times out of 10, I'll do a little drawing for them. I'll do a little painting for them, and it's just such great practice for me because I'm constantly being tested. I'm constantly being pushed. I'm constantly being questioned, and it's not unusual for me to have to help myself understand a principle. I mean, it's becoming less and less usual as time goes on. It's been 20 years, but it still happens where someone will ask me a question or something will come up where I'll be like, man, I don't know why this is the way it is. Let me think about that. And then I'll spend an entire evening really thinking it through and doing research or doing studies or doing experiments, trying to figure out why something is the way that it is so that I can teach them. And I can't imagine doing that if I wasn't teaching, not at that level and not that often. So, that whole cliche that you learn more as a teacher than the students is maybe not entirely true, but I certainly learn a lot from my students, or at least from teaching my students. So
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
pleasure.
So what are the main kind of things you've learned from all the artists you've interviewed on your podcast?
Holy cow. That's been amazing. Um, probably I hate to pick one out, but I'm gonna. Joe Paquette, I interviewed him sort of back in the beginning. I've only been doing this a year, and he was, I say, maybe in my first 20. And I chose him because he's a great plein air painter, and I'm not, and I want to be one. And um, I asked him all the questions that I've never been able to ask anybody, and he had answers that changed. It sounds so lame, but he had answers that really changed my life. I was like, next time I went out painting, I had his voice in my
Mm.
head, and I had all the answers to these questions that I'd had for so long, and it genuinely changed my painting. I did a plein air contest or competition one year, and then I interviewed him the next, or I interviewed him maybe 6 months later, and then 6 months after that, I did the very same plein air competition, and my paintings were two, three, four times as good as they were the year before, and I totally credit him for that.
Wow.
And because he just told me things that were so obvious, all I had to do was hear it,
Mm.
and I'm like, okay, now I get it. Um, and then I've learned a lot of things from all the artists like that. But his was just, I just a packed full of information for me.
Yeah,
Uh,
Stan.
but then also just inspiration when interviewing other artists. It just really motivates me to be better because these are people I admire, and then I get off my computer after an interview and just am pumped to be better at painting and try and do something great like my guests are doing. So that's been awesome. And another sort of corny benefit of this, but it's the absolute truth, is I've interviewed 54 people now, and I bet you can relate to this. I have 54 new friends. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I've kept in touch with most of them. I feel like I know 54 more people who I respect, and it's been awesome. I love it. How long have you been doing it? You've been doing it like 5 years, 6 years,
10.
10 years? You must have thousands of friends.
I am so popular. No, well, yeah, I started in 2013, but I didn't really start interviewing artists probably till 14 or 15. But I'm on, this is episode 277. So what, that's 250,
Wow.
250-ish
That's
artists. Yeah.
awesome.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
So I mean, can you relate to those things that I just said?
Yes. Yeah. 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 I've found when you were saying earlier on that you listen back because you can't remember. I don't do that. I forget. I forget most of the things. But what stands out to me is, and it'll happen in a conversation, and maybe you've had this experience, a bit like what you were saying with Joe. I just know I'm being changed in as they're saying it. I can kind of go, this is a pivotal conversation, and it's not. It's they'll say one thing, in one conversation. It might be like a 3-hour conversation, and they'll just say one thing, and it makes a huge difference. And I remember those, I can, like, they're very strong, and the rest is just as you say, it's just a lovely experience, and you get a new friend kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of it, I don't even know how much of it is subconscious, because every time I get done with an interview, I feel like I've learned so much, but then I
Mm.
do 5 more interviews, and I can't keep all that information consciously
Mm-hmm.
6, 7, 8 interviews back. So I worry that I'm losing it, but I'd like to believe that subconsciously all this stuff is sinking in, and it's still coming out in my work, and helping me make subtle improvements in my own work.
Well, try this on for size. I have a feeling, like for a long time, I kind of felt like, because I didn't go to art school or anything like that, but I felt like doing this podcast was kind of like my art school, because I learned a lot of things technically, not so much directly. Like someone would say something, and then I'd have to go and figure out what they were talking about, and then and now
Right.
I'm quite knowledgeable about all that. So I wouldn't say I'm very skillful, but I'm very knowledgeable.
Right.
But
Well, yeah, I
what
think you're very
it,
skillful.
oh, thank you. What it has done is it has nurtured me as an artist.
Yeah.
Definitely. That for sure I can say, because
Well, what
I'm
do
a
you mean
little
by that exactly? Nurtured
well,
you.
um I've got a much better sense of myself as an artist as a result of talking to so many artists. That because when I started, my skill level was non-existent, and these people were so fantastic, and it was a real Wayne's World. I am unworthy. It was that kind of vibe, listening to these people. And I mean, it's still pretty much mostly like that, but what has happened over the years is I think I started to separate out the skill from the artist, because you talk to enough artists and you start to see, you get a sense of this common thread among them all, of this thing that's inside them that's expressing itself. Sometimes it expresses itself in this kind of genius thing of where they just do things that it would never even occur to you, like Rupert von Kaufmann. It just springs to mind of, like, he never uses reference, he just draws,
Wow.
and his work is amazing. He's very skillful, he can do it, but he just draws out of his head these amazing things, and if that's
Mm.
like, it's not like I suddenly started doing that, but it changed me, to talk to someone and that's just what they do, they don't use reference at all, for example, But what the thing about being an artist is, like, similar to you, and you probably have found this, like that, there's so many different, there's so many different things that I do. Painting is one of them. Then, I've got all these different uh, ways of expressing myself. And for a good while, I was kind of like going, what am I doing a podcast for? I should just be painting more, Or what am I doing this? Why am I writing? I should write. Maybe I should just write, maybe I should just focus, but no one thing. I kept being drawn to all these different things, And slowly it dawned on me. And then somebody said it to me. I think it was Anne McGill. Who's another great artist, was on the podcast. And she was saying, but what are you worried about? You're the center of it all. You're the artist, and it all just comes out of you. And it was another kind of light bulb thing of,
Mm.
like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm the golden goose. They're all golden eggs. I'm the goose. I don't have to worry about it. And she was just putting into words what I think was sort of slowly. I was realizing myself anyway. So that's what I mean about being nurtured as an artist. I mean, sure, I learned lots of technical things, but I think it sort of, all the conversations nourished me as an artist in a way that I wouldn't have been if I hadn't have had all these conversations.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. Yeah, it's just so inspiring. And it's crossed my mind. I don't know how long I can keep doing it. I mean, it's really time consuming. And
Is it?
yeah. I mean, I hope you're joking. It is for you too, isn't it?
Oh my God. Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay, because if you figure out a way to make it not time consuming, I need to know. But I mean I'm working 70 hours a week easy. I just never stop. But because I don't want to give anything up. And the podcast is certainly on the top of that list of things I don't want to give up.
Hmm.
Because like you said, I feel like I'm in art school. I did go to college and I did have a few good teachers and I did learn some things, but I have learned I've learned so much from the podcast. It's been like art school on steroids.
Yeah.
And I agree with you on the nurturing thing, not just physical or not just technique, but also just inspiration. And the other thing is it's nice to know that, well, it's sort of disconcerting, but also nice is it to know that you are not the only nuts person out there. Um, and I don't mean literally nuts, obviously, but artists are a rare breed, and I think artists think differently. and I don't mean and I'm certainly not saying that the way they think is better or worse. It's just different. And and you know, trying to live in a family and trying to navigate the world, and sometimes I start to feel like I just can't relate to anybody. And then having this podcast has made me realize, oh, there's a whole bunch of people out there just like me
Hmm.
that I can absolutely relate to. And it's not because they like painting, it's because the thing that makes them like painting is what we have in common. It's the thing that makes them driven to create. It's
Yeah.
not painters that I have something in common with. I can interview a totally insanely passionate woodworker and get the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, it's that drive to create that makes you nuts. And if you can't create, you can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't, you just, even if you're like me and you don't always love the process, you just have to do it. It's like in your DNA and you can't not do it.
Yeah.
That kind of
Yeah.
insanity is nice. It's nice to know you're not alone in the world. That's actually been really therapeutic.
Yeah. 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 Lovely. Jesse Lane, wonderful artist and former podcast guest, episode 177, if you're looking for it, says, my question is for both of you. What's your favorite art podcast other than each other's? P.S. I love listening to both of your shows.
You want to go first or you want me to go first?
I don't mind.
Art
Do you have to think of...
podcast?
Yeah.
No, I know which one I like the best. I like the Creative Endeavor. Um, yeah, Creative Endeavor. I think he's really good. Andrew Tischler. The guy's he asks great questions. He's got a good podcast voice and he's got a really good production value. And he gets great guests. Yeah, I think he's real good. What about you?
Um, Art's History.
I don't even know that one. I got to look into
Yeah.
that one.
It's not out anymore. It's still
Oh,
there,
bummer.
but they're not making any new ones. It's just really funny. It's a very contemporary. It's two sisters who went on an odyssey through Europe, visiting and America as well, visiting very famous artworks and giving their what they thought of them and a bit of backstory on it. But it's done in such a very contemporary way, very sweary, I think, from memory. That's very good. I also like Art Howell's podcast. That's another fantastic art
Man, I am
history
out of the loop.
podcast.
I don't even know that one either.
Yeah, this guy does deep dives into he'll do it one artist, and each episode is an hour long, and he might do 8 episodes about one artist. So that's like 8 hours of just one artist. Like he's done Caravaggio, Frida Kahlo,
Oh, it's an art
Jack
history one.
Jackson Pollock. Yeah, it's art history, but he goes into, and it's got that kind of funny twist as well of putting it in contemporary version. So that's very good. And and then the other, Jennifer Dazzle's art history podcast, is very good as well. So
Man,
those
that's
would be
three
my
for three. I don't know any of them. So
my three. Oh yeah, they're
I'm
very
going to
good.
have
Yeah.
to listen back to this because I've already forgotten all the names. I'm going to listen back and write them down. See what I mean about my memory? You heard of
Um,
Creative Endeavor?
yes, I have. Yeah, I listened to
Okay.
it a little bit. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm just out of the loop.
yeah.
Those are great.
Um, if there was one main underlying theme to all your work, what do you think it would be?
Well, I'm clearly interested in the figure. That's probably very broad, but if I could tie everything together, it would be the figure. And the other thing is, uh, I paint what I care about. That would be probably the emotional underlying theme is, I mean, I paint about God, who I worship, and I paint about family, who I care about. And it's not my family, but their families. So those are
Yeah,
my priorities in life. And those are the two things that I'm interested in. So, yeah.
yeah, very good. Holly Schneider Sampson says, how do you manage and divide your time for such tasks as painting, other creative endeavors, producing a slamming podcast, and social media?
Social media gets some serious neglect. I suck at social media. Hopefully that'll change soon. The other stuff is it's rough. I mean, I just mentioned I'm working like 70 hours a week. It's really hard. And teaching online, I probably paint maybe 25 hours a week right now. Um, and so yeah, so I should be painting a little bit more, but hopefully that'll change. My goal is it'd be interesting to know how you do it, John, but my goal is to eventually get enough support on the podcast that I can just hire someone to do the podcast. I don't even care if I make any money, but just hire someone to do it, and then I can still do it, but not have to do the work. Just show up for the interviews and not have to do the work. That's the dream. So at some point, hopefully, I'll take that off my plate, and then I'll just be teaching and painting again, and that'll make things a lot easier. So, but it is hard to balance. And then the other thing is I can't stop doing my hobbies. So I kind of throw those into. So I really don't do anything. I mean, I'm not one of those people that goes home at 6 o'clock and just jumps in front of the TV. When I go home, I eat, I get on the computer, I edit, I go to sleep, I wake up, I get up, I wake up, I get on my email, answer emails, go to work, paint, do stuff, teach, come home, edit. I mean, it's just nonstop, 7 days a week. So there's not a lot of balance. It's just nonstop. I'm going to die young.
Or you're never going to retire, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I don't want to retire. And the thing is, I love everything I'm doing, but it isn't healthy because things do get neglected. I could be a better husband. My house needs work. Things like that. And those aren't small things. So like I said, I'm figuring it out. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
gotta figure out how to purge some stuff, but I don't want to. It's all good. I love it all. So
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I learned from talking to all those artists was um, I talked to so many artists who have said, and in answer to the desert island question, that, you just, and particularly with the, if I have a question I ask about big art dreams, and most of them will say, if I can just keep doing what I'm doing, that's
yeah, I
it.
don't quit. I'm
That's
retired.
my big dream. Yeah, a big
Yeah.
show would be nice, big museum show would be nice, but if I can just keep doing what I'm doing, and that they are so happy to just get up in the morning and paint all day long, and that if they can just keep doing that, they'll be happy. So, for someone who has many interests like myself, I had to force myself to focus on the thing that I wanted to do the most and put that at the top of the priority list. The thing that I could be like those artists, and that I could get up in the morning and do it all day long, and it wouldn't, I wouldn't bother me, and I'd be just happy to do that. To sort of, that's thinking of it in those terms helped me create a kind of priority pyramid, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I get probably a better answer to the question for me is I have to schedule and I have to be good about following it. In other words, I podcast this time, I edit for the podcast this time, I teach online on Fridays, I edit online on Saturdays, and I paint on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You know what I mean? It's like
Mm.
I have to do that. Otherwise, all that stuff, because I could easily come to work, and to avoid having to work on Sundays, I could be editing on Mondays and Tuesdays during my painting time. And that's just not an
Mm-hmm.
option.
Mm.
Right. So, and then, yeah, so I get Sunday off, but it's just not an option I got to get that painting time in because the last thing I want to do is let my painting suffer.
Yeah.
Because all this, and frankly, is to serve the painting. Everything else I'm doing is serving the painting. The painting is the core.
Yeah.
And my teaching's helping my painting. My podcast is helping my painting. Everything revolves around the painting.
Yeah.
So I got to make sure I find time for the painting. But for honestly, 25 hours a week for me is actually good. I don't want to paint 40 hours a week. I just don't. Because like I said earlier, I do need variety. I have too many interests and I'm comfortable with that. What I
Yeah.
need isn't 30 hours or 40 hours of painting. What I need is a day off. That's what I need
You need a
is
holiday,
just a
Jeff.
day off. Yeah. No, I just need one day a week where I have nothing to do, but that's never going to happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Veronica Winters in Florida says, "What are the ways of selling your work? Do you do portrait commissions as your primary sales goal?"
No, I think I explained all that. I
Yeah,
probably don't need to go into that again. Yeah.
yeah. What sort of price range are your paintings selling for at the moment?
Yeah. So basically, I have this foundation doing the Life of Christ thing. I've got the occasional portrait commission, and then I do other paintings on the side, just little landscapes and occasional portrait, to just as a break. And then, of course, I'll try and sell those as well. Not the landscape so much; those are in the drawers. But I'll do the occasional portrait just for fun. But for the most part, my my main energy goes into the biblical paintings with the occasional portrait commission.
Okay. And what sort of price range are your paintings selling for at the moment?
Wow, is that a normal question?
Yep, I ask everyone.
Is it really? Wow.
Yep.
Um, uh, well, the price range is pretty big. I mean, the religious paintings are around 250,000, and then the portrait commissions it depends on the size of the family. They can go from 75 to over 100,000. Um, and then, and then smaller paintings are obviously significantly cheaper. Um, so, I mean, if I were to sell like a little portrait, it might be just like a little 12 by 16 or something. It might be around 8 to 10.
Okay. Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Do you have a big art dream you'd like to achieve before you die?
Yeah, I want to finish this Life of Christ thing. That's it. That's it.
That's
I
it.
really don't. It'd be cool to have a one man show. I had one man show many years ago and I didn't like it. So I don't like the pressure of it. I didn't like the scene. It's just not my thing.
Mm,
Um, so I'm not, I only bring that up because you had mentioned the one man show and that is a lot of people's dreams. It's not one of mine.
mm, mm.
It would be nice to be in museums. I think that would be really cool to have shows in significant museums. I've got some in smaller ones, but not, I mean, it'd be awesome to be in significant, really huge museums. But
Mm.
my main goal is to finish this project before I die. And yeah, that's really it. And just
How
to
many
get,
how many paintings are in that sequence? Is it a quantified number or is it?
no, just, well, oh, that's a good question. That's a good question and point. There is no number.
Okay.
So I will do it until I mean, 20 minimum, and or when the funds run out. So hopefully I'll be able to at least get to 20 and then maybe 25, maybe more. If I think I think it, but I think at some point, if I get to 20 or 25, I might be done, like mentally done, like just ready to
Yeah.
move on to something else. Right. So I can't imagine it's just go on forever, but it could take me into my 60s and 70s.
Right.
Um, could be the next 20 years.
And
So
did you say it's all the life of Christ? It's not Old Testament stuff at all.
no, just the life of
Okay.
Christ. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, this is my last question. I ask this to everyone, but maybe you haven't heard
Okay.
it. If there's one thing you could pass on to future generations, what would it be?
Oh, okay. Oh, I asked the same question at the end of mine. You'd think I would know an answer. Um, One thing I could pass on. And now, are you so pass on meaning like something that I leave behind or advice? You're looking for advice of some sort.
It can be whatever.
Hmm. Well, if I'm being completely honest, the reason I want to do what I'm doing is because I feel like whether you're Christian or not, the message of Christ. And, if you take a minute to read the Beatitudes, for example, and all of those traits of meekness and mercy and goodness and kindness and all those types of things, I mean, it's just good, right? It's just, if we could all live like that, whether you believe in Christ or not, we'd be in a lot better world. And so that's the reason I'm so passionate about this subject, is because I want to do something more meaningful than just decorating walls. I want to do something that says something about that not says something, but that teaches something that's positive, that can only be good for the world. Whether people get that from my paintings, most won't probably, but even if just a few do, if just a few people look at this Life of Christ series after I die and think, oh man, here's one guy who had a reasonable amount of talent, who devoted his whole life to this. Maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something to living a life like taught in the New Testament, like taught by Christ. Maybe there's something to it. Now, I'm not out to, it's not a conversion project. It's just a message that's positive, right? Um, Teaching people that there's something really good in that message that Christ taught in the New Testament. So that would be, I mean, that's literally what I'm trying to leave behind. So I guess to try and think of anything else would be insignificant.
Okay. All right. Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, it's great talking to you. It was an honor. I can't
Oh,
believe
you're
you've been doing this
welcome.
for 10 years. That's insane. That is a long time. I hope
Yeah.
I can get to 10 years. So you're an inspiration.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, it's been lovely chatting with you. I think your paintings are fantastic. And as somebody with, you know, different interests, it's so impressive that your paintings cover such a spectrum. Like technically, it's so yeah, it's so impressive because you're. I don't know if anyone said this to you, maybe they have, but your family portraits have a real kind of Norman Rockwell kind of storytelling, but with that very light kind of touch of humor that Rockwell was so good for. You've got an element of that in there, and that's not easy to do.
Well, thank
And
you.
then your biblical works are yeah they're pretty up there. I can see why I can the Caravaggio comparison wasn't flattery. They are right up there. I think
Well,
they're
that's
very
quite a compliment. Thank you.
they're very good, and again that kind of paintings that's not easy to do. And then some of your portraits are right up there with where I see the kind of future of figurative work going, with this kind of blending of abstraction in the background, or there might be like a neon halo around the person, or all sorts of different things that are experimental, you know. So to be able to sort of pull each one of those different things off is it's not easy. And then you're doing so well with all this technological stuff. You know, your podcast. You know, technically, your podcast is so it's like streets
Thanks.
ahead of mine. It feels like mine is held together with like sellotape and a toothpick
Well,
in
yours is just
comparison.
audio, so it's not a big deal.
Oh no, it's video as well now, but
Oh, it is. I thought it was audio. Okay.
yeah, no, it's on YouTube. I've been getting them up on YouTube as well, but you know, it's very basic compared. You know, you've got these lovely graphics and whatever, you know. So, and your live streaming setup, the gadgets, even just like to make a solvent dispenser, it's fantastic, you know. So yeah, and
Thank you.
it's lovely to hear your authenticity and your rigor, and you're just in the trenches like the rest of us, trying to live your best life. It's so obvious, and be true to what's true to you, and that's inspiring. And yeah, it's been lovely to chat with you and get to know
Thanks,
you a
John.
bit.
That was quite a compliment. I really appreciate that. And it was really fun chatting with you. When you sent me that message saying you want this to feel like a chat, it really did feel like that. You're quite good at that. So appreciate it. Really. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. It was a pleasure.
Okay, well, as I said, I keep in touch with everybody just like you do, so I'm sure we keep in touch. But yeah, we'll say goodbye for now.
All right. Goodbye. Thanks again.
I've never felt this good in my entire life. Make me some spaghetti.
Actually, I'd prefer a cup of tea. A cup of tea would be lovely. So yeah, just a little reminder, mainly because every second or third person who becomes a patron has got in touch with me and said, you know what, I've been listening to your podcast for ages and I didn't become a patron, not because I don't have the money, not because I don't think it's great, I just didn't get around to it. So this is a little friendly reminder that if you'd like to be a patron, you'd like to buy me a cup of tea, go to patreon.com/John Dalton, gently does it, all one word, or follow the link in the show notes to become a patron. I would really appreciate it if you could do that, particularly if you've been meaning to and you just haven't got around to it. It would be great. It would mean a lot to me. All right, thank you. Bye.
We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. We're better than you thought, but not as good as we think. We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. Come on, buy us a drink. Come on, buy us a drink. We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. We're better than you thought, but not as good as we think. We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. Come on.